The story is not over yet. My stepbrother shouted, his voice echoing off the sterile walls of my hospital recovery room. I was barely conscious, my body still numb from a grueling surgery, when he shoved a thick legal document onto my lap and demanded I sign away everything my father had left me. When I whispered the word no, he did not just yell. He slapped me so hard I hit the cold linoleum floor, tearing my fresh stitches. The police arrived in horror, but what I did next shocked them even more. I am Camille, 35 years old, and the founder and chief executive officer of an elite crisis public relations firm in Atlanta. Before I tell you how I dismantled my stepbrother's entire life and political career, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to teach toxic family members a lesson they will never forget. Your support helps me share these stories of standing up to narcissistic abuse. Waking up from surgery is a disorienting experience. The world comes back to you in fragments. First, the rhythmic, monotonous beeping of a heart monitor. Then, the sharp antiseptic smell of medical-grade bleach. Finally, the dull, throbbing ache radiating through my abdomen. I was in a private recovery room at a premier women's clinic in Midtown Atlanta, having just undergone an extensive and painful excision surgery for severe endometriosis. It was a procedure I had put off for years, prioritizing my business and my clients over my own health, until the pain simply became impossible to ignore. As I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, I looked around the room. It was completely bare. There were no colorful floral arrangements on the windowsill. There were no metallic balloons tied to the bedpost. There were no get-well-soon cards resting on the tray table. I was entirely alone, and in a way I preferred it that way. Independence had been my armor for as long as I could remember. The silence of the room offered too much space for my thoughts to drift back to my father Warren. He had passed away just 4 weeks ago. My father was a titan in the Atlanta business community, a self-made man who took a single delivery truck and built a regional logistics empire through sheer willpower and relentless hustle. He was a man of few words but massive presence. We had a complicated relationship mostly because we were exactly alike. We were both stubborn, fiercely independent, and utterly intolerant of laziness. When I was 15, my father married Brenda, a woman who cared more about country club memberships and social status than anything else. She brought her teenage son DeAndre into our home. From day one, DeAndre was the golden child. He was handsome, charismatic, and completely allergic to hard work. While I spent my summers working the dispatch desk at my father's warehouse to earn my own car, DeAndre was handed the keys to a brand new luxury sedan on his 16th birthday. My father thought he was providing a good life for his stepson, but he was actually funding a monster's entitlement. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to manage the agonizing pain in my ribs and stomach. The nurse had told me I needed absolute rest, but rest was a luxury I was about to be denied. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside my room. The heavy wooden door did not just open, it was shoved inward with aggressive force, hitting the rubber doorstop with a loud thud. I flinched, my hand instinctively dropping to my bandaged stomach. In walked DeAndre. He was 36 years old and currently in the middle of a highly publicized, completely disastrous campaign for a seat on the city council. He was wearing a tailored navy blue suit, but the collar of his dress shirt was unbuttoned, and he was sweating profusely. His eyes were wide and frantic. Right behind him was his wife, Jasmine. Jasmine was 34 and treated her role as a political spouse like she was auditioning for a reality television show. She was dressed in a beige trench coat, a pristine white blouse, and an oversized pearl necklace. She walked into my hospital room with her nose slightly wrinkled, as if the very air of a medical facility was beneath her. She carried an expensive designer handbag draped over her forearm, her sharp gaze scanning the room before landing on me with thinly veiled disgust. Neither of them asked how I was feeling. They did not ask if the surgery was successful. They did not even offer a fake polite greeting. DeAndre marched straight to the side of my hospital bed. He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of stapled legal papers, and tossed them carelessly onto my lap. The heavy packet landed directly across my surgical incisions, causing a sharp spike of pain to shoot through my body. I let out a sharp gasp, gritting my teeth as I reached down to move the papers. "Sign it," DeAndre demanded. His voice was not requesting a favor, it was an order. I slowly adjusted the hospital bed, raising the backrest so I could look him in the eye. I picked up the document. The bold black letters at the top of the first page read, "Renunciation and Disclaimer of Inheritance." I looked from the papers back to DeAndre. My mind, trained to analyze crises and unearth hidden motives, immediately began connecting the dots. My father had left behind a highly complex multi-million-dollar trust fund. It was divided among the family, but the stipulations required all primary beneficiaries to agree before any major assets could be liquidated. "What is this, DeAndre?" I asked, my voice raspy from the breathing tube they had used during surgery. "Do not play stupid with me, Camille," he snapped, pacing the short length of the room. "You know exactly what it is. Dad's estate is tied up in probate, and the trust requires unanimous consent to release the capital. I need you to sign away your share of the liquid assets right now." I stared at him, incredulous. "You want me to forfeit my inheritance?" Jasmine stepped forward, resting her perfectly manicured hand on DeAndre's shoulder. "Let us be realistic here, Camille," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You are a single woman. You do not have a husband. You do not have children. You already have your little public relations business. You do not need this money. DeAndre is trying to build a legacy for our family. His campaign is at a critical juncture." Her words were carefully chosen to sting, aiming at my single status, but they only fueled the cold, calculating fire in my chest. I knew exactly what a critical juncture meant in political terms. It meant he was broke. As the founder of a crisis management firm, I made it my business to know the secrets of Atlanta's elite. I knew DeAndre's campaign was a sinking ship. He had alienated key donors with his arrogant behavior, his polling numbers were in the basement, and his campaign manager had recently quit in the middle of the night. He had poured millions of dollars into flashy billboards and expensive gala dinners, while neglecting actual grassroots community work. He was drowning in debt, and he was looking at my father's trust fund as his personal bailout. "You are bankrupting your campaign." "DeAndre," I said calmly, letting the papers slide off my lap onto the bedside table. "And now you want to bankrupt our father's legacy to cover your incompetence." DeAndre stopped pacing. His face flushed a dark, angry red. "You do not know anything about politics," he practically spit. "I am out there shaking hands, kissing babies, carrying the family name. I am doing the real work while you sit in some glass office cleaning up scandals for degenerate celebrities. Dad would have wanted me to have that money. I am his son. You are his stepson." I corrected, my voice steady, despite the physical agony radiating through my core. "And Dad spent the last 10 years bailing you out of 3 failed businesses. He told me before he died that he was done writing blank checks. That is why the trust is locked." Jasmine scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You are just bitter because your father actually loved DeAndre more than he loved you. You were always jealous of the attention Brenda and DeAndre got. Just sign the paper, Camille. Stop being so selfish. We need the cash for the final television ad buy before the election." I looked at Jasmine's designer bag, then at DeAndre's panicked, sweating face. They were not just greedy, they were desperate. And desperation makes people dangerous. But they had fundamentally miscalculated who they were dealing with. They saw me as the quiet girl who always sat in the corner at Thanksgiving dinners, absorbing their snide remarks to keep the peace for my father's sake. They forgot that the quiet girl grew up to be a woman who orchestrated the downfall of corrupt corporate executives for a living. "I am not signing anything," I said, leaning my head back against the thin hospital pillow. "In fact, as a co-trustee, I am going to formally request a full forensic audit of the estate before a single dime is distributed. Now get out of my room before I call security." The air in the room shifted. DeAndre's panic vanished, replaced by a raw, unhinged fury. He stepped so close to the bed I could smell the stale coffee and expensive cologne radiating off his skin. Jasmine took a step back, sensing the sudden change in her husband's demeanor. "You are going to sign this paper," DeAndre growled, his voice dropping to a terrifying guttural whisper. "You are not going to embarrass me. You are not going to ruin my election." I reached for the nurse call button resting by my shoulder. "I told you to leave." That was when he snapped. "The story is not over yet," DeAndre shouted, the veins in his thick neck bulging against his stiff collar. He lunged forward before my fingers could even brush the plastic casing of the nurse call button. His heavy hand swung through the air in a blur, making brutal contact with the side of my face. The sheer force of the blow violently snapped my head to the side. The room tilted sideways. I was dragged off the edge of the narrow hospital mattress, my body twisting awkwardly as I plummeted toward the cold linoleum. When I hit the ground, the impact sent a shockwave of blinding agony through my core. It was not just the blunt force of the fall. It was the sickening sensation of my freshly sewn surgical incisions ripping open across my abdomen. I gasped, clutching my stomach as a sharp burning pain radiated through my lower ribs. Warm blood immediately began soaking through the thin, pale fabric of my hospital gown, pooling against the cold floor beneath me. DeAndre stood over me, his chest heaving, his fists still clenched at his sides. "You think you are too good for this," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at my crumpled form. "You think you can just sit up in your penthouse and judge me while I do the heavy lifting for this family. You are going to give me what I need." Jasmine finally reacted, but not out of compassion. She gasped, taking a quick step backward to ensure the spreading pool of my blood did not touch the tips of her expensive designer heels. "DeAndre, stop!" she hissed, her voice laced with panic over the optics, not the violence. "Someone is going to hear you." I lay there on the cold floor, the metallic taste of copper filling my mouth, where my teeth had cut into the inside of my cheek. Any normal person would have been terrified. Any normal person would have cried. But I did not shed a single tear. My mind, hardened by years of navigating the most vicious corporate war rooms in America, instantly shifted into survival mode. It shifted into crisis management mode. As I looked up at my stepbrother's red, furious face, I did not see a powerful politician. I saw the exact same insecure, cruel boy who had moved into my father's house 2 decades ago. I remembered the way he used to intentionally break my childhood projects and blame the housekeeper. I remembered how Brenda would conveniently forget to set a place for me at the dining table during the holidays, claiming it was just an honest mistake. I remembered how they slowly and systematically tried to erase my presence from my own home, treating me like an unwanted guest in my father's life. For 20 years, I had kept my mouth shut. I endured their passive-aggressive comments, their blatant theft of my father's resources, and their relentless attempts to make me feel small. They mistook my silence for weakness. They assumed my refusal to engage in their petty screaming matches meant I was a victim they could easily bulldoze. They completely forgot who I was. They forgot that I built a multi-million-dollar public relations empire by dismantling abusive narcissists just like them. I dismantle powerful men who think they can take whatever they want without consequence. In my line of work, we call a physical assault an unforced error. DeAndre had just crossed the one line he could never uncross. He had handed me the exact ammunition I needed to destroy his entire life. The heart monitor attached to my chest had been ripped from its socket when I fell, triggering a piercing continuous alarm that echoed down the hospital corridor. Footsteps pounded against the tile outside. The heavy wooden door was thrown wide open. 2 nurses rushed in, freezing in their tracks as they took in the horrific scene. A woman bleeding on the floor and a man standing aggressively over her. "Oh my God!" the head nurse yelled. She immediately dropped to her knees beside me, pressing a thick wad of sterile gauze against my bleeding stomach. "Call security right now. Call the police." The moment the word police left the nurse's lips, the furious tyrant standing over me vanished. In a fraction of a second, DeAndre changed his entire demeanor. His face morphed from violent rage to calculated panic. His political instincts, however flawed, kicked in. He took a wide step back, raising his hands in a defensive, non-threatening posture as two large security guards burst into the room. Their hands rested heavily on their utility belts as they assessed the threat. Jasmine immediately stepped in front of DeAndre, physically shielding him from the guards. "Please, there has been a terrible misunderstanding," she said, her voice suddenly trembling with rehearsed distress. "My sister-in-law is heavily medicated. She is grieving the loss of her father. She got confused and fell out of her bed. We were just trying to help her up when you walked in." I looked at Jasmine, marveling at the sheer audacity of her lie while I was actively bleeding on the floor. She was smooth, I had to give her that. She knew exactly how to play the concerned relative. But a lie only works if there is no concrete evidence to contradict it. Less than 3 minutes later, two uniformed Atlanta police officers strode into the crowded recovery room. The tension in the air was thick and suffocating. The officers took one look at the blood soaking my clothes, the terrified nurses trying to stabilize my vitals, and the slick, well-dressed couple standing in the corner trying to look innocent. "What exactly is going on here?" the taller officer asked, his hand hovering near his radio. DeAndre stepped forward, smoothing the lapels of his navy suit, ready to deploy the charm offensive that had fooled half of his voting district. "Officer," he began, his voice dripping with fake sincerity and manufactured sorrow. "Thank God you are here. My sister is having a severe psychological episode. She just lost our father, and the surgical drugs are making her violent. She attacked me, and in the struggle she lost her balance. We need to get her psychiatric help immediately." The taller officer frowned, his eyes darting from my blood-stained hospital gown to DeAndre's perfectly pressed suit. DeAndre leaned into his lie with the practiced ease of a career politician. He lowered his voice, adopting a tone of deep, brotherly sorrow. "Officer, my sister has been struggling with severe mental health issues for years. Our father just passed away, and the grief has completely unhinged her. She refused to sign some standard probate paperwork, started screaming, and lunged at my wife. I only put my hands up to protect Jasmine, and Camille stumbled backward. She is a danger to herself. We need to get her evaluated immediately." Jasmine nodded vigorously, playing the part of the terrified victim. She was acting so unhinged, officer. I thought she was going to kill me. Before the police could even ask me for my version of events, the heavy hospital door swung open again. In walked Brenda, my stepmother. She was 58 years old, draped in a cashmere shawl, and wearing oversized designer sunglasses despite being indoors. She had clearly rushed over from a country club luncheon the moment Jasmine texted her that there was trouble. Brenda took one look at the police officers and instantly understood the assignment. She did not look at me bleeding on the floor. She marched straight up to the taller officer and placed a manicured hand on his arm. "Thank goodness you are here," she sighed, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. "I am their mother. This family has been through hell this month. My late husband tried so hard to get Camille the psychiatric help she needs, but she refuses to take her medication. She has a documented history of hysteria. You have to put her on a 72-hour involuntary psychiatric hold. Please, officer. It is the only way to keep her safe from herself." I lay on the cold linoleum, the head nurse still pressing thick gauze against my torn surgical incisions. I watched my stepmother, my stepbrother, and my sister-in-law form a united front of wealthy, respectable concern. They were trying to Baker Act me. They wanted to lock me in a psychiatric ward for 3 days, discrediting my sanity so they could take control of my father's estate without my interference. It was a brilliant, vicious strategy. If I screamed, if I cried, if I defended myself with too much emotion, I would only prove their point. I would look exactly like the hysterical, grief-stricken woman they were describing. The officers exchanged a hesitant look. I could see the doubt creeping into their eyes. On one side, they had 3 well-dressed, articulate family members telling a consistent story. On the other side, they had a bleeding, silent woman on the floor. The taller officer reached for the radio attached to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. We might need a psychiatric evaluation team at the Midtown Women's Clinic," he said. That was my cue. I did not yell. I did not cry. I looked up at the head nurse and spoke in a steady, chillingly calm voice. "Please help me sit up and hand me my cellular phone. It is on the bed." The nurse hesitated, but gently gripped my arm, helping me lean back against the metal frame of the hospital bed. She reached up and handed me my phone. Brenda scoffed, crossing her arms over her cashmere shawl. "Look at her, officer," Brenda said dismissively. "She is in shock. She does not even know what she is doing. You need to take her away." I ignored her. I unlocked my phone and opened a hidden application on my home screen. As the chief executive officer of a crisis management firm, my entire life revolves around controlling the narrative. When you negotiate with corporate sharks, disgraced celebrities, and blackmailers, you never rely on memory. You rely on hard evidence. I run a high-grade cloud-synced dictaphone application that runs silently in the background of my phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I had activated a fresh recording the exact second I heard DeAndre's heavy footsteps outside my door. "Officers," I said, my voice cutting through the tension in the room like a scalpel. "Before you call a psychiatric team, I think you should listen to my medical history." I turned the volume on my phone all the way up and pressed play. The audio was incredibly crisp. The room fell dead silent as DeAndre's voice echoed from the small speaker. "Do not play stupid with me, Camille." The recorded. DeAndre snapped. "You know exactly what it is. Dad's estate is tied up in probate, and the trust requires unanimous consent to release the capital. I need you to sign away your share of the liquid assets right now." I watched the color instantly drain from DeAndre's face. Jasmine took a sharp step backward, her hand flying to her mouth. Brenda froze, her eyes widening behind her designer sunglasses. The recording continued, capturing Jasmine's condescending remarks about my single status and my business. It captured my calm refusal. Then came DeAndre's unhinged, guttural threat. "You are going to sign this paper. You are not going to embarrass me. You are not going to ruin my election. I told you to leave." Then came the climax. The audio captured the sickening, unmistakable sound of a heavy hand striking human flesh. The loud smack echoed in the quiet hospital room, followed immediately by the heavy thud of my body hitting the floor and my sharp gasp of pain. The recording finished with DeAndre snarling that I thought I was too good for this family. I pressed pause and placed the phone on my lap. I looked directly at the taller officer. "As you can hear, I am not suffering from a psychiatric episode. I am suffering from domestic assault and attempted financial extortion." The atmosphere in the room violently shifted. The officers' faces hardened. The taller officer immediately dropped his hand from his radio and moved directly toward DeAndre. He unclipped the metal handcuffs from his belt in one fluid motion. "Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded, his voice devoid of any previous sympathy. DeAndre panicked. He backed away. His hands raised, his eyes darting frantically around the room. Wait, you do not understand. That audio is out of context. She provoked me. I am a city council candidate. You cannot arrest me. Do you know who my family is? Turn around right now," the second officer barked, stepping forward to flank him. Brenda lunged forward, grabbing the officer's arm. "You cannot do this. It was a family disagreement. She is trying to ruin his career." "Ma'am, step back or you will be arrested for interfering with an investigation," the officer warned, shrugging her off. DeAndre was breathing heavily, sweat pouring down his forehead. He looked at me, a mixture of pure hatred and absolute terror in his eyes. If they marched him out of this clinic in handcuffs, the press would have a field day. His political career would be over before the sun went down. "Officer, wait," I said. The officers paused, looking back at me. DeAndre blinked, clearly shocked that I had intervened. "I do not want to press charges today," I said smoothly. The taller officer furrowed his brow, looking completely baffled. "Mom, You have him on tape committing a violent assault. You are actively bleeding from a ruptured surgical site. We have all the evidence we need to take him to county jail right now." "I know," I replied, my voice steady. "But if you arrest him now, it is a simple misdemeanor assault charge. His high-priced lawyers will bond him out in an hour. They will release a statement to the press, calling it a private family matter blown out of proportion. I do not want him arrested for a misdemeanor. I want you to file a detailed incident report. I want you to log the audio recording into your official evidence system. And then I want you to escort these 3 people off the hospital premises immediately." The officers hesitated. They were not used to victims dictating the terms of engagement with such cold precision. But legally, if the victim of a misdemeanor battery refused to press charges, their hands were tied. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" the officer asked. "I am positive," I said. I looked at DeAndre. He was confused, but I could see the arrogant relief washing over his face. He actually thought he had won. He thought I was too scared of the family backlash to pull the trigger on his arrest. He thought I was showing mercy. He was completely wrong. In the world of crisis public relations, you never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake. A misdemeanor assault would be a minor roadblock for his campaign. But I knew DeAndre was hiding massive illegal financial secrets. If I let him walk away today, he would feel invincible. He would escalate. He would make bolder, stupider moves to get my father's money. And when he finally stepped into my trap, I was not going to send him to a local holding cell for a few hours. I was going to send him to a federal penitentiary for a decade. "Get out of my room," I said, staring directly into Brenda's eyes. "And if any of you ever come within 50 feet of me again, I will not just release that audio to the police, I will release it to every major news network in the state of Georgia." Brenda grabbed DeAndre's arm, her face pale. Jasmine was already walking briskly out the door, eager to escape the humiliating scene. Without another word, DeAndre turned and fled the room, his mother trailing closely behind him. The police officers took my official statement, collected a copy of the audio file, and promised to station a security guard outside my door for the remainder of my stay. Once the room was finally empty, the head nurse finished redressing my wounds. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and concern. "You are a very tough woman," she whispered as she taped the final piece of gauze. "But they are going to come after you for this." I leaned back against my pillows, ignoring the throbbing pain in my side. I reached for my phone and dialed the private number of my corporate attorney, Malik. "I know they are going to come after me," I told the nurse with a faint, dangerous smile. "That is exactly what I am counting on," Malik answered on the second ring. He is a corporate attorney whose reputation in Atlanta is as intimidating as my own. We have been friends since college, and over the years we have built a professional synergy that most law firms fear. I gave him a rapid-fire summary of everything that had just transpired in my recovery room. I told him about the renunciation document, the physical assault, the recorded audio, and my decision to send the police away without making an arrest. Most lawyers would have panicked at the idea of letting an assailant walk free, but Malik simply chuckled. A low, dark sound over the receiver. "You gave him enough rope to hang himself," Malik said. "He thinks he won the battle today, which means he is going to rush his next move. Get some rest, Camille. I will start preparing the financial subpoenas. When he makes his play, we will be ready." I spent the next 3 days recovering at my condo, managing my firm remotely, while my body tried to heal from both the surgery and the assault. I was sore, but my mind was operating at full capacity. I anticipated DeAndre would try something desperate, perhaps leak a rumor to the press, or attempt to forge my signature on the probate documents. What I did not anticipate was the sheer scale of the legal bomb he was about to drop on my life. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island sipping a cup of black coffee and reviewing a client portfolio when my cell phone vibrated. It was Malik. He never called before 8 in the morning unless the building was on fire. "Open your email right now," Malik said, his voice stripped of its usual calm demeanor. "Do not speak. Just open it and read the attachment." I set my coffee mug down, wincing slightly as a dull ache radiated from my stitches. I opened my laptop and clicked on the encrypted file Malik had just sent. The header of the document made my blood run cold. It was an emergency ex parte injunction filed in the probate court of Fulton County. The plaintiff was DeAndre, the defendant was me. I scrolled through the first few pages, my eyes scanning the heavy legal jargon. Then I hit the sworn affidavits and a wave of pure, unadulterated disgust washed over me. DeAndre and Brenda had not just filed a motion to dispute the trust. They had filed a petition accusing me of elder financial abuse. The allegations were entirely fabricated, but they were written with a sickening level of detail. Brenda claimed that during the last 6 months of my father's life, I had used my skills as a psychological manipulator to isolate him from his family. She stated under oath that I had restricted his visitors, intercepted his phone calls, and emotionally abused him while he was in a vulnerable medicated state. DeAndre added his own sworn statement, claiming he had witnessed me coercing our dying father into altering the terms of his business succession plans. They took the most painful sacred months of my life and weaponized them. When my father was dying of pancreatic cancer, Brenda was too busy attending charity galas to sit by his bed. DeAndre was too busy trying to buy political endorsements to even visit the hospital. I was the one who sat in that sterile oncology ward night after night. I was the one who held his hand when the pain became unbearable. I was the one who managed his hospice care, fed him ice chips, and listened to his final regrets. Because I was the only one there, they were now twisting my devotion into a sinister plot of forced isolation. "This is a complete fabrication," I said into the phone, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "They have no proof, no medical records, no witnesses. How did a judge even look at this without throwing it out of court?" Malik sighed heavily. "Because DeAndre is calling in his political favors. He filed this in Judge Abernathy's courtroom. Abernathy is an old golfing buddy of the very real estate developers who are funding DeAndre's city council campaign. They bypassed standard protocol. They claimed you were a flight risk who was actively trying to wire your father's remaining liquid assets to offshore accounts. Abernathy signed the injunction an hour ago without giving us a chance to respond." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What does the injunction actually do, Malik?" There was a long pause on the line. Camille, Malik said softly, "They froze everything." I did not understand. "What do you mean, everything?" The judge granted a temporary asset freeze, pending a full investigation into the elder abuse allegations. Malik explained, his tone grim. "Abernathy ordered a freeze on all financial accounts bearing your social security number and your primary business tax identification number. They are trying to starve you out." I dropped the phone onto the kitchen counter, leaving Malik on speaker. I rapidly opened a new tab on my browser and navigated to my corporate banking portal. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I typed in my credentials. The screen loaded and a massive red banner appeared at the top of the dashboard. "Account restricted. Please contact your branch administrator." I stared at the screen, a cold sweat breaking out across the back of my neck. I clicked over to my personal checking account. Restricted. I checked my high-yield savings account. Restricted. I checked the operating account for my public relations firm, the account that held millions of dollars in client retainers and company capital. Restricted. Available balance reading 0. A sharp, suffocating panic gripped my chest. This was not just a family squabble over a dead man's money anymore. This was an attempt to obliterate the life I had built for myself. I had 30 employees working at my downtown Atlanta office. I had payroll due on Friday. I had a massive commercial rent payment scheduled for the first of the month. I had vendor contracts, software licenses, and legal retainers that required constant cash flow. By freezing my corporate accounts, DeAndre and Brenda were effectively paralyzing my entire business operations. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew I did not need my father's money to survive because my firm was highly profitable. But if they could temporarily cut off my access to my own capital, They could force me to my knees. It was a classic, ruthless siege tactic. They wanted me to watch my business crumble so that I would beg them for a settlement. They expected me to call them crying offering to sign the renunciation of inheritance in exchange for them dropping the fake elder abuse charges and lifting the financial freeze. I picked up the phone again. My breathing had steadied. The initial panic was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. "How long until we can get a hearing to unfreeze the accounts?" I asked. Malik shuffled some papers in the background. Because of the severity of the elder abuse claim, Abernathy scheduled the preliminary hearing for 3 weeks from now. It is a deliberate delay tactic. They know you cannot run your firm without capital for 3 weeks. They want me to settle, I said, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my condo at the Atlanta skyline. They want me to hand over the trust fund today to save my company tomorrow. Exactly, Malik said. And legally, we are in a tight spot. Until we can get in front of a different judge and present counter-evidence, those accounts are locked tight. You cannot pay your staff. You cannot pay your rent. I walked over to the window, watching the morning traffic crawl along the highway below. In the world of crisis management, the moment you let your enemy dictate the timeline is the moment you lose the war. DeAndre and Brenda thought they had successfully backed me into a corner. They thought taking my money would break my spirit because money was the only thing they valued. They did not understand that my true power was not in my bank accounts. It was in my brain. Draft an aggressive motion to dismiss, and a motion for judicial recusal based on Abernathy's conflict of interest, I instructed Malik. I do not care how many hours it takes. File it by tomorrow morning. And what about your firm? Malik asked, genuine concern leaking into his voice. What about payroll? I will handle my firm, I replied smoothly. Let DeAndre think his little probate trick worked. Let him think I am suffocating. I want him arrogant. I want him sloppy. Because when a narcissist thinks they are winning, they stop covering their tracks. I hung up the phone and closed my laptop. The pain in my abdomen throbbed, a physical reminder of the assault mirroring the financial blow they had just delivered. They wanted a war. They were about to learn that I was the one who wrote the rules of engagement. By Wednesday morning, the reality of the asset freeze hit my public relations firm like a devastating shockwave. I arrived at my glass-walled office in downtown Atlanta early, hoping to manage the legal fallout before my staff walked through the doors. But bad news travels faster than light in the corporate world. At exactly 9 in the morning, my director of finance knocked on my open door. His face was ashen, and he held a tablet tightly against his chest before quickly closing the heavy door behind him. Camille, our automated payroll system, just kicked back every single direct deposit, he said, his voice tight with panic. The bank is saying our primary operating accounts are locked under a judicial order. I have 30 employees expecting their paychecks to clear by tomorrow morning. What is going on? I remained seated behind my desk, keeping my posture perfectly straight. In crisis management, the leader cannot show a single drop of sweat. I am handling a temporary legal dispute regarding my late father's estate, I told him evenly. A judge issued a blanket financial freeze that mistakenly caught my business accounts in the crossfire. But the bleeding did not stop at payroll. An hour later, an urgent email hit my inbox from the property management group that owned our commercial building. It was a formal notice of default. Our monthly commercial rent of $25,000 had bounced. The email politely but firmly stated that if the funds were not cleared within 48 hours, they would initiate eviction proceedings and lock my entire company out of the executive suite. My office phone began to ring incessantly. Key vendors were getting declined credit card notifications. Software subscriptions essential to our daily operations were threatening to suspend our corporate licenses. DeAndre had aimed straight for my jugular, and I had to admit the execution of his attack was brutally effective. He wanted to humiliate me in front of the elite team I had spent years building. As I sat in my office mapping out emergency cash flow options, my cell phone chimed. I glanced at the screen. It was a text message from Jasmine. I picked it up and read the words she had probably spent an hour crafting with DeAndre over their expensive morning lattes. Sign the trust over, or we bankrupt your little agency. You are nothing without your father's name. It is not too late to apologize and do the right thing for the family. I stared at the glowing screen. The sheer audacity of her message was almost comical. Jasmine actually believed my success was a direct byproduct of Warren's wealth. She truly thought my firm, which handled multi-million-dollar accounts for international tech companies and disgraced politicians, was some vanity project funded by a rich daddy. She thought my reputation was something I bought rather than something I bled for. I did not reply to her. Engaging with a narcissist's taunt only validates their perceived power. Instead, I took a screenshot of the blatant extortion attempt and saved it to the encrypted folder on my secure server. Every text, every lie, every threat was just another brick I was going to use to build their federal prison cell. At noon, Malik walked into my office, dropping a massive leather briefcase onto my conference table. He locked the glass door and pulled the privacy blinds down, shielding us from the anxious eyes of my employees in the bullpen outside. "The emergency motions are filed," Malik said, loosening his silk tie and taking a seat. "But Abernathy's clerk is stonewalling us. They are deliberately dragging their feet on scheduling the emergency hearing to unfreeze the assets. We are stuck in the mud for at least 2 weeks. How bad is the bleeding here at the firm?" I walked over to the table and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. "Payroll bounced this morning," I said, handing him a glass. "The commercial landlord is threatening eviction by Friday. And Jasmine just texted me a written extortion demand directly tying the release of my accounts to my surrender of the trust fund." Malik choked on his water, letting out a sharp bark of laughter. She put it in writing. "Are these people legally brain dead?" "They are desperate," I corrected, taking a slow sip from my glass. "And desperate people get incredibly sloppy. But we still have a massive cash flow problem right now. I refuse to let my staff suffer because of my stepbrother's incompetence." Malik leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany table. "Camille, you could easily call in a favor. You have elite clients who owe you their entire careers. You saved a tech billionaire from a federal indictment last year. Make one phone call and he would wire you a $1 million personal loan to cover your operating costs until the judicial freeze is lifted." I shook my head immediately. Absolutely not. I keep my toxic family drama entirely separate from my client relationships. That boundary is exactly why they trust me with their darkest secrets. Besides, I do not need a loan. I walked over to the digital wall safe hidden behind a framed abstract painting in my office. I punched in the biometric code, pulled out a thick leather-bound financial portfolio, and tossed it onto the table in front of Malik. "What is this?" he asked, opening the heavy cover. "That is the holding company I set up 7 years ago," I explained, watching his eyes scan the documents. "The entity is registered in Delaware and is entirely untethered to my social security number or my primary business tax identification. DeAndre and Brenda only searched for assets linked directly to my personal name in Georgia. They have absolutely no idea I own a separate limited liability company that holds my personal liquid investments. There is more than enough capital in those shadow accounts to cover payroll, rent, and vendor contracts for the next 6 months." Malik scanned the bank statements, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "You built a completely untraceable emergency shadow fund." "I grew up in a house with Brenda," I said flatly, returning to my chair. "I learned very early on never to leave all my resources in a place where someone else could reach them. DeAndre thinks I am a spoiled trust fund baby because that is exactly what he is. He assumes my father bankrolled this firm. He has no idea I started this agency with a $10,000 minority business grant and a refurbished laptop in a cramped studio apartment. I never took a single dime of Warren's money. Not for my college tuition, not for my business capital, not for my home. I built this empire brick by brick while DeAndre was busy crashing luxury cars and failing out of business programs. Malik closed the portfolio with a satisfying thud. So we bypass the frozen accounts completely. We route the emergency funds from the Delaware entity through a third-party payroll vendor to cover your corporate expenses anonymously. To the outside world and to DeAndre, it will look like you are bleeding out. But internally, your firm remains absolutely bulletproof. Exactly, I said, a cold smile forming on my lips. If they think they are starving me out, they will drop their guard. They want a public spectacle, Malik. DeAndre is trying to break me psychologically, so I will fold and sign the papers before his big campaign gala next week. So what is our counterstrike? Malik asked, his eyes gleaming with the anticipation of a courtroom bloodbath. We are going to let them think their smear campaign is working flawlessly, I said, leaning over the table. DeAndre filed a public court document accusing me of elder abuse. By tomorrow morning, he is going to leak that fabricated document to the press. He wants to destroy my professional reputation, so I have nothing left to fall back on except the trust fund he is holding hostage. I want you to prepare a massive defamation lawsuit, but do not file it yet. We need him to get on a public stage and claim victory. We need him to feel completely untouchable. Malik nodded slowly, already typing furiously on his phone to set the legal traps. And what about the campaign finance fraud? We know he is broke, but we need hard proof that he is misusing funds. I am working on that tonight, I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I have a private meeting with an old contact, someone who used to run in DeAndre's political circles. Someone who knows exactly where my stepbrother has been hiding the money he embezzled from my father's businesses. By the time Malik left my office, the suffocating panic that had infected my staff earlier that morning was completely eradicated. I held a brief closed-door meeting with my senior management team, assuring them that alternative, secure funding had been successfully routed and their paychecks would clear by the end of the business day. I did not give them the messy details of the family war. I only gave them the absolute promise that the agency was secure and our operations would continue without a single interruption. I sat back in my leather executive chair and looked out the massive windows at the bustling city of Atlanta below. DeAndre and Brenda wanted to squeeze me until I broke. They thought applying financial pressure would force me to surrender my father's legacy to fund their pathetic ambitions. But all they had done was give me the perfect legal excuse to completely dismantle their lives. The pressure was not going to break me. It was going to forge the exact weapon I needed to destroy them. The game had fundamentally changed, and DeAndre had no idea he was already playing on a board I completely controlled. My prediction materialized less than 24 hours later. It was Thursday morning, and I was sitting at my desk reviewing the overnight analytics for a corporate client when my computer screen lit up with a priority notification. I have a custom media tracking algorithm set up for my own name, my firm, and every member of my family. The algorithm was suddenly flashing red, indicating a massive spike in online mentions. I clicked the alert and was immediately redirected to the Atlanta Metro Insider, the city's most notorious and heavily trafficked political gossip blog. It was the kind of website that specialized in destroying careers thriving on leaked court documents and unverified rumors from anonymous sources. The headline spanned the entire width of the page in bold black letters. A family torn apart, city council candidate fights to save fathers. Legacy from estranged greedy daughter. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the article. DeAndre had not just leaked the fabricated probate court documents. He had orchestrated a full-scale media blitz. The article painted a nauseatingly detailed, completely fictitious picture of my father's final days. According to the anonymous source, which was undeniably Jasmine, based on the overly dramatic vocabulary I had swooped in during my father's final months to systematically isolate him from the family that truly loved him. The blog post featured a carefully cropped photograph of DeAndre standing next to my father's hospital bed. I recognized the photo instantly. It was taken 5 years ago when my father had his gallbladder removed, long before the pancreatic cancer ever took hold. but to the general public it looked like the heartbreaking image of a devoted son standing vigil. The narrative was sickeningly effective. It framed DeAndre as the noble public servant who had sacrificed his own time to manage the family logistics business, only to be betrayed by a cold, calculating sister who only cared about the trust fund. The article completely omitted the fact that DeAndre had bankrupted 3 of those businesses. It also conveniently glossed over the fact that he was currently bleeding cash in his political campaign. Instead, it ended with a quote from Brenda claiming her only wish was to see her late husband's philanthropic vision honored rather than hoarded by a daughter who had always hated the family. I sat back in my chair feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. As a professional who dismantles hit pieces for a living, I had to admit that from a purely tactical standpoint, it was a heavy blow. In the court of public opinion, the first person to speak usually controls the narrative. DeAndre was preying on the public's natural sympathy for a grieving family and their inherent distrust of wealthy, independent businesswomen. But public opinion was not my immediate concern. My concern was the ripple effect this would have on my firm. Less than an hour after the article went live, my private office line rang. It was the chief executive officer of a prominent regional bank, one of my oldest and most conservative clients. We managed all of their corporate communications and executive reputation portfolios. Camille, the executive, said, his voice clipped and highly uncomfortable. "We saw the piece circulating this morning. We know you are dealing with a private family matter, but the allegations in that court filing are incredibly severe. Elder financial abuse is not something we can be tangentially associated with, especially given our older demographic of account holders." "I understand your concern," I replied smoothly, keeping all emotion out of my voice. "The allegations are completely baseless and stem from a contested probate issue. My legal team is already handling it. I am sure they are." The executive interrupted gently. "But until this is fully resolved in your favor, the board of directors has decided we need to temporarily suspend our retainer with your agency. We have to protect our own shareholders." "I am sorry, Camille." The line clicked dead. I placed the receiver back on the cradle, my jaw tight. Losing a legacy client was painful, but losing them because of my stepbrother's lies was infuriating. 30 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, it was a massive private healthcare network we represented. Their chief operating officer delivered a nearly identical speech. They were in the business of elder care. Having their crisis management firm run by a woman publicly accused of abusing her dying father was a catastrophic optics nightmare. They terminated their contract effective immediately. Within 2 hours, the gossip blog smear had cost my agency over $400,000 in annualized revenue. DeAndre was trying to burn my house down with me inside it. The glass door to my office swung open and Malik stormed in. He looked uncharacteristically disheveled, holding a printed copy of the blog post in his fist. He slammed the paper down on my desk, the veins in his forearms popping against his rolled-up sleeves. "Tell me you have seen this trash," Malik demanded, pacing the length of my office. My phone has not stopped ringing. DeAndre forwarded this article to every major news outlet in Fulton County. He is trying to force a public trial by media before we even get a chance to step into a courtroom. "I saw it," I said quietly, watching Malik pace. "And I just lost 2 of our largest corporate accounts because of it." Malik stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening in fury. "He cost you 2 retainers." "That is it. I am not waiting for the preliminary hearing. I am filing the defamation lawsuit right now. I am going to draft a cease and desist letter so aggressive it will make his campaign lawyers weep. We are going to issue a press release calling him a fraud and demanding an immediate retraction." "No," I said sharply. Malik stared at me like I had lost my mind. "Camille, you cannot just take this hit. You are a crisis manager. Your entire brand is built on controlling the narrative. If you stay silent, the public and your clients will assume the allegations are true. You have to fight back publicly." I stood up from my desk and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city. "I am a crisis manager, Malik. which means I know exactly how a crisis evolves. When a client comes to me because someone is telling lies about them, the first instinct is always to scream the truth from the rooftops. But screaming makes you look defensive. It turns a one-sided attack into a massive muddy brawl. And in a brawl, everyone gets dirty. I turned around to face him. DeAndre wants me to issue a frantic denial. He wants me to hire lawyers and blast press releases. He wants me to attack him in the media because it validates his narrative that I am aggressive and unhinged. If I engage in a public shouting match, the story stays in the news cycle for weeks. The blogs will dissect every word I say. So we just let him destroy your reputation? Malik asked, his voice laced with frustration. We let him talk. I corrected, walking back to my desk and tapping the printed article. Look at this piece, Malik. It is full of emotional language, but it lacks any verifiable facts. DeAndre is an arrogant narcissist running a failing political campaign. Right now, he is sitting in his campaign headquarters, checking his phone every 5 minutes, watching his name trend on social media. He is getting addicted to the attention. He feels powerful. I looked Malik directly in the eye. In my line of work, the most dangerous thing you can give a liar is a microphone and an empty room. If we stay completely silent, DeAndre will think he has intimidated me into submission. His ego will inflate. He will feel the need to keep the momentum going, which means he will do more interviews. He will make bolder claims. He will start speaking off the cuff without his lawyers filtering his words. Malik slowly sank into the chair opposite my desk, the realization dawning on his face. The lawyer in him recognized the strategy. You want him to perjure himself in the court of public opinion. Exactly, I said. I want him to weave a web of lies so thick and so public that he can never untangle himself. Every interview he gives, every podcast he goes, on every statement Jasmine leaks to the blogs. We are going to let them dig the hole as deep as they possibly can. We are not going to interrupt them. And then what Malik asked, a dangerous spark returning to his eyes. And then I said softly, we wait for his campaign gala next week. He invited the entire Atlanta press corps to that event because he intends to use my silence as proof of his victory. He thinks he is going to stand on that stage and announce that he saved the family estate. He thinks he is going to be the hero. I picked up the printed article and dropped it into the shredder next to my desk, listening to the satisfying sound of the blades destroying the paper. Do not file the defamation suit yet, I instructed Malik. Just document every single dollar of revenue I lost today, add it to the damages, and call my contact. We need to finalize the evidence on his offshore accounts. Let DeAndre have the gossip blogs today. Next week I am taking his freedom. Friday morning arrived with a crisp breeze that swept through the manicured lawns of the Buckhead Heritage Club. It was one of the most exclusive, heavily guarded country clubs in Atlanta, a place where multi-million-dollar deals were brokered over mimosas and eggs Benedict. It was also the exact location where my stepmother Brenda and my sister-in-law Jasmine were hosting their annual Women in Leadership charity brunch. They had spent the entire week parading their fabricated victimhood across the internet, soaking up the sympathy of Atlanta's elite. I knew exactly how these events operated. Brenda would be wearing something excessively tailored, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief as she recounted the tragic story of how her late husband's legacy was being threatened by his unstable daughter. Jasmine would be standing right beside her, nodding solemnly, playing the supportive wife of the embattled political candidate. They thought I was hiding in my penthouse condo, licking my wounds and mourning the loss of my corporate retainers. They believed the frozen bank accounts had completely paralyzed my ability to fight back. They were completely unprepared for a frontal assault. I pulled my sleek black sedan into the valet circle, handing the keys to a startled attendant. I was dressed for war. I wore a tailored crimson pantsuit that commanded attention the second I stepped through the heavy oak doors of the club. The maitre d' attempted to intercept me in the grand foyer, holding a clipboard and asking for my invitation. I bypassed him entirely, moving with the kind of absolute, unquestionable authority that service staff are trained never to physically obstruct. I glided into the main dining room. The space was a sea of pastel dresses, oversized floral centerpieces, and the low hum of wealthy gossip. Waiters carried silver trays lined with crystal champagne flutes. I scanned the room and spotted them immediately. Brenda and Jasmine were seated at the head table near the floor-to-ceiling windows, surrounded by a captive audience of influential socialites. Brenda was in the middle of a sentence, her hand resting delicately over her heart, when she caught sight of me. The words died in her throat. Her jaw went slack. The women around her followed her frozen gaze, turning their heads to look at the woman in the crimson suit, walking straight toward their sanctuary. The low hum of conversation in the immediate vicinity dropped to a dead silence. Jasmine recovered first, though her panic was palpable. As I approached the table, she immediately stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. She leaned over and frantically flagged down a broad-shouldered security guard stationed near the terrace doors. "What are you doing here?" Jasmine hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing the attention of the entire room, though the women at her table were already leaning in with breathless curiosity. "You are not a member here, Camille. You are trespassing. Get out before I have you arrested." I ignored her entirely and pulled out the empty mahogany chair directly across from Brenda. I sat down, crossing my legs gracefully, and placed my leather handbag on the pristine white tablecloth. The security guard arrived at the table, his expression stern. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, addressing me. "Are you an invited guest of this party?" Jasmine glared at him. "She is not. I want her removed immediately. She is harassing us and causing a disturbance." I looked up at the guard, my expression completely neutral. I reached into my handbag, pulled out a solid gold membership card, and set it flat on the table. My father had purchased a legacy membership for me 10 years ago, an asset Brenda conveniently forgot about since I rarely wasted my time attending their superficial luncheons. "I am a legacy member," I told the guard calmly, tapping the gold card with my index finger. "And I am simply having a private conversation with my family. If you lay a hand on me to physically remove a member from the dining room without cause, my attorney will own this country club by Monday morning. Is there a problem here?" The guard looked at the gold card, then at Jasmine, and finally took a large step backward. "No problem, ma'am," he murmured quickly, retreating to his post by the doors to avoid a massive legal liability. Jasmine sank back into her chair, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. The socialites at the table suddenly found their champagne glasses fascinating desperately, pretending they were not witnessing a family war unfolding over brunch. A nervous waiter approached the table holding a silver coffee pot. "Can I get you anything, miss?" he asked, his hands trembling slightly as he felt the toxic tension radiating from our side of the table. "Black coffee," I said without breaking eye contact with Brenda. "Leave the pot." The waiter quickly filled a porcelain cup, set it in front of me, and vanished. I took a slow sip. The coffee was bitter, exactly how I liked it. Brenda finally found her voice. Her hands were gripping the edge of the table so tightly, her knuckles were white. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here, Camille," she whispered fiercely, "after what you have done to us." DeAndre's poll numbers took a massive hit initially because people were distracted by your ridiculous refusal to sign the trust documents. But the blogs are already exposing who you truly are. You are losing everything. Your clients are leaving you. The probate judge is going to strip you of your executor rights. I set my coffee cup down on the saucer with a soft clink. It was fascinating to watch them operate in person. Behind the safety of a keyboard or an anonymous blog tip, they were vicious predators. But sitting 3 feet across from me, breathing the same air, they were trembling. They were trying to project strength, but their defensive posture betrayed their deep-seated fear. "I am not here to discuss your internet blogs, Brenda," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet commanding the absolute attention of everyone within earshot. "I am here to deliver a message." I reached into my handbag again and pulled out a sleek, unmarked black folder. It was incredibly thin. It did not contain pages of legal threats or drafted lawsuits. It contained exactly one piece of paper. I placed my palm flat against the dark leather cover and slowly slid it across the white linen tablecloth. The folder glided smoothly over the fabric until it stopped directly in front of Jasmine. Jasmine looked at the folder, as if it were a live explosive. "What is this?" she demanded, refusing to touch it. "Another one of your fake legal threats. We already froze your accounts, Camille. We know you are broke. You cannot afford to fight us in a prolonged court battle." "Open it," I commanded. Jasmine hesitated, glancing at Brenda for reassurance. Brenda gave a slight dismissive nod, confident that I was just bluffing with an empty prop. With trembling fingers, Jasmine reached out and flipped open the cover of the black folder. Inside was a single high-resolution photograph. It was a printed screenshot of a digital ledger, but it was not just any ledger. It was the internal accounting dashboard for a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The screen captured exactly three things: the name of the shell company, the current balance of $4.2 million, and the authorized signatory on the account. DeAndre. It was the exact amount of money missing from the 3 logistics businesses my father had entrusted to DeAndre before his death. It was the war chest DeAndre was illegally tapping into to fund his city council campaign, a blatant violation of federal election laws. The dates of the offshore wire transfers perfectly aligned with his massive television advertisement buys. It was the ultimate smoking gun. I watched the color instantly drain from Jasmine's face. The smug, condescending sneer she had worn since I walked into the room completely vanished, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. Her breath hitched in her throat. She quickly slammed the folder shut, looking around frantically to see if any of the wealthy women at the table had caught a glimpse of the highly illegal document. Brenda frowned, sensing the catastrophic shift in her daughter-in-law's demeanor. "What is it?" Brenda asked, reaching her hand out for the folder. "What did she give you?" Jasmine clamped her hand down violently over the black leather, physically preventing Brenda from opening it. "Nothing," Jasmine choked out, her voice cracking under the weight of the panic. "It is nothing." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. The silence between us was heavy and suffocating. I had not yelled. I had not caused a scene. I had simply presented them with the absolute truth of their impending destruction. They had spent the week trying to destroy my reputation with rumors. I had just destroyed their entire reality with a single printed photograph. I looked directly into Jasmine's panicked eyes, lowering my voice so only she and Brenda could hear the final nail being driven into their coffin. "Did you really think I did not audit the estate the day Dad died?" I whispered. Jasmine's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She was hyperventilating, her perfectly contoured face pale and stricken. She knew exactly what that photograph meant. It meant that while they were busy playing games in probate court and leaking petty rumors to gossip blogs, I was quietly holding the evidence of a federal crime that would send her husband to prison for a very long time. It meant that all of her country club memberships, her designer clothes, and her political aspirations were about to vanish into thin air. I did not wait for a response. I did not need one. The absolute devastation in their eyes was the only confirmation I required. I picked up my handbag, stood up from the table, and smoothed the front of my crimson suit. "Enjoy your brunch, ladies," I said loudly enough for the entire table to hear. "And Jasmine, make sure DeAndre checks his posture for the campaign gala next week. He needs to look his absolute best for the cameras." I turned my back on them and walked out of the dining room with the same measured, powerful strides I used to enter. I did not look back, but I could feel the shockwaves of my exit rippling through the room. I left them sitting at their table surrounded by luxury, completely and utterly shaking in their designer shoes. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and DeAndre was about to walk straight into a public execution. I walked out of the country club and handed my valet ticket to the attendant. The afternoon sun was warm against my skin, but internally I was ice cold. I knew exactly what was happening inside that dining room the moment the heavy oak doors closed behind me. Jasmine was frantically dialing DeAndre, her perfectly manicured fingers shaking against the screen of her phone. She was telling him about the black folder. She was telling him that I possessed the exact offshore bank account numbers he used to siphon $4.2 million from our late father. By the time I slid into the leather driver's seat of my sedan, DeAndre would be in a full-blown panic. But panic is a volatile emotion. If an animal is cornered and terrified, it acts unpredictably. It might bite, or it might run. I did not want DeAndre to run. I wanted him to walk willingly onto a brightly lit stage in front of hundreds of people. To ensure he did exactly that, I needed to replace his panic with arrogance. I needed to give him a false sense of absolute victory. I drove straight back to my office in downtown Atlanta. Malik was already waiting in my executive suite reviewing a stack of digital contracts. I locked the glass door behind me and closed the privacy blinds. "Did you deliver the message?" Malik asked, looking up from his tablet. I dropped my handbag onto the sofa. I gave them the Cayman Islands ledger. Jasmine looked like she was going to faint right into her eggs Benedict. DeAndre knows we have him dead to rights. Malik frowned, leaning back in his chair. If he knows we have the ledger, he might try to flee. He might try to liquidate whatever is left in that offshore account and catch a private flight out of the country before we can notify the federal authorities. He will not flee, I said, walking over to my desk and opening my laptop, because we are about to convince him that I am completely powerless to use that ledger against him. A narcissist like DeAndre cannot comprehend a strategic retreat. If someone bows their head, he assumes they are broken. I am going to bow my head. I sat down at my keyboard and opened a blank document. As a crisis management professional, I have drafted hundreds of resignation letters for disgraced corporate executives, caught politicians, and scandalous celebrities. I know the exact corporate vocabulary required to signal total defeat while maintaining a facade of polite dignity. It was time to write my own. I typed for 10 minutes straight, carefully selecting every word for maximum emotional impact. I needed to sound exhausted. I needed to sound like the frozen bank accounts and the gossip blog smear campaign had completely destroyed my spirit. Malik walked around the desk and read the screen over my shoulder. He let out a low whistle. "You are actually going to publish this?" I pressed a button on my keyboard, submitting the document directly to my public relations distribution software. It is already done. Within 5 minutes, the statement went live across all of my professional social media platforms and was simultaneously emailed to every major news outlet in Atlanta. The headline was simple: "Statement from Camille regarding her tenure as Chief Executive Officer." The statement read as follows: "After much deep reflection following my recent abdominal surgery and the heartbreaking tragic passing of my beloved father, I have made the incredibly difficult decision to step down as Chief Executive Officer of my firm, effective immediately. The physical toll of my recovery, compounded by recent painful family disputes that have unfortunately spilled into the public eye, has made it impossible for me to lead this incredible agency with the focus it deserves. I am stepping away to prioritize my health, to heal from my grief, and to seek a peaceful resolution to my family affairs." It was a masterpiece of manufactured vulnerability. To the general public, it read like a tragic story of a woman pushed past her breaking point. To the corporate world, it looked like a disgraced executive abandoning a sinking ship. But to DeAndre and Brenda, it was a white flag waving desperately in the wind. My phone began to ring almost immediately. Industry colleagues, remaining clients, and journalists were blowing up my inbox. I turned my phone on silent and tossed it into my desk drawer. "Now we wait for his ego to take over," I told Malik. It did not take long. The narcissistic brain is a highly predictable machine. Less than 2 hours after my statement hit the internet, Jasmine released an anonymous, updated quote to the Atlanta Metro Insider blog. The quote claimed that my resignation was a long overdue admission of guilt regarding my unstable behavior, and that the family was praying for my mental recovery. But the real confirmation that the trap had snapped shut came directly from DeAndre. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, an encrypted text message popped up on my personal cell phone. I opened the message. It was a photograph of the black folder I had left at the country club, sitting on what looked like DeAndre's campaign office desk. Below the picture was a text from DeAndre himself. "You played a good game, Camille. But fake offshore ledgers do not work when everyone knows you are broke, unemployed, and legally frozen. It was a cute bluff. I accept your surrender. Have Malik send the trust renunciation documents to my lawyers by Monday. If you sign them cleanly, I will convince the probate judge to drop the elder abuse investigation so you can try to rebuild whatever is left of your pathetic little life." I smiled a cold, sharp expression that made Malik raise an eyebrow. "He took the bait," I said, turning the phone so Malik could read the message. "He thinks the ledger is fake. Or at least he has convinced himself that even if it is real, my frozen bank accounts and my resignation mean I do not have the financial resources or the industry credibility to bring the evidence to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He thinks I showed it to Jasmine as a desperate bluff to get him to back off." Malik let out a dark chuckle. "He thinks you surrendered because you ran out of money. He has no idea the shadow company is currently funding your entire operation behind closed doors." "He thinks he won," I replied, locking my phone. "And a winner always wants a victory lap." The very next morning, DeAndre proved my theory completely correct. Emboldened by my public silence and what he perceived as my total professional destruction, he decided to capitalize on the momentum. His political campaign had been drowning, but the recent media attention from our family drama had put his name back in the headlines. He wanted to ride that wave all the way to Election Day. DeAndre scheduled an impromptu press conference on the steps of City Hall. I watched the live broadcast from the massive flat-screen television mounted on the wall of my office. He was wearing his signature navy suit, looking freshly groomed and incredibly smug. Jasmine stood dutifully by his side, wearing a modest floral dress, playing the picture-perfect political wife. "I want to thank the citizens of this great city for their overwhelming support during a deeply trying time for my family," DeAndre said into the cluster of microphones. "The rumors and the legal disputes surrounding my late father's estate have been painful. But our family is committed to healing." He paused, offering the cameras a practiced benevolent smile. "I am thrilled to announce that we are reaching a final peaceful resolution. My sister has recently decided to step away from her professional duties to seek the quiet healing she desperately needs, and we fully support her journey. In the spirit of transparency and family unity, I am officially inviting the local press to my upcoming campaign gala this Saturday night at the Grand Plaza Hotel." He leaned closer to the microphones, his eyes gleaming with unearned triumph. "At the gala, I will be making a major family announcement regarding the future of my father's legacy and the massive charitable endowments we will be distributing to this city. It will be a night of unity, forgiveness, and moving forward." I muted the television. The sheer hubris of his statement was breathtaking. "He is going to announce that he secured the trust fund," Malik said, staring at the screen in disbelief. "He thinks you are going to show up to the gala broken and defeated to publicly hand over the estate, just to get the frozen accounts lifted." "He has already spent the money in his head," I said quietly. "He thinks the gala is his coronation. He invited the entire press corps to watch him play the merciful king, forgiving his hysterical sister. It was the ultimate trap, and he had built it himself. He had gathered all the cameras, all the wealthy political donors, and all the influential journalists into one massive ballroom. He wanted an audience to witness my humiliation. But in doing so, he had provided me with the exact audience I needed to execute his public destruction. "Let him enjoy the weekend," I told Malik, turning my attention back to my computer monitor. "Let him pick out his tuxedo. Let Jasmine buy a new dress. Because starting Monday, we are going to tear his entire world down to the studs. Do you have the files from his former campaign manager?" Malik opened his heavy leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, encrypted hard drive. "I do. Everything is here. The wire fraud, the forged vendor invoices, and the direct links between his campaign accounts and the Cayman Islands shell company." "Excellent," I said, taking the hard drive. Tell our shadow network to begin formatting the audio and video files. We have a gala to produce. I left my downtown office and drove straight to the towering glass skyscraper that housed Malik's corporate law firm. The city of Atlanta was beginning its weekend transition, the streets filling with glowing brake lights and people heading to crowded restaurants. DeAndre and Jasmine were likely among them, raising a glass of expensive champagne to celebrate my supposed surrender. They had no idea that while they were toasting to their victory, Malik and I were actively building their guillotine. Malik's private conference room was a fortress of mahogany and soundproof glass located on the 42nd floor. The room was completely secured, swept weekly for listening devices, and accessible only by biometric scanners. When I walked in, the heavy oak doors sealed shut behind me with a reassuring click. Malik had already ordered his paralegals to go home for the weekend. We needed absolute secrecy for this phase of the operation. I set the encrypted hard drive on the center of the massive conference table. This small piece of metal was the culmination of months of silent, meticulous surveillance. It was time to reveal exactly how I had obtained the Cayman Islands ledger that had sent Jasmine into a spiraling panic at the country club. In the world of crisis public relations, your network is your most lethal weapon. 3 years ago, a brilliant political strategist named Harrison found himself at the center of a devastating scandal. He had been falsely accused of embezzling campaign funds by a corrupt state senator trying to cover his own tracks. Harrison was facing absolute ruin. He was looking at federal prison time, and his reputation in the political sphere was completely obliterated overnight. He came to my firm in desperate tears, begging for help. I did not just clear Harrison's name. I completely dismantled the corrupt senator who framed him, orchestrating a media counter-narrative so aggressive that the senator was forced to resign in disgrace within a month. Harrison avoided prison, salvaged his career, and swore absolute loyalty to me. I had saved his life. 6 months ago, DeAndre decided to run for city council. Because DeAndre possessed the political instincts of a brick, he realized he needed to hire a top-tier campaign manager to give his disastrous run some credibility. He hired Harrison. The moment DeAndre extended the job offer, Harrison called me. He asked if I wanted him to decline the position given the toxic history of my family. I told him to do the exact opposite. I told him to accept the job demand, full access to the campaign financial servers, and keep his eyes wide open. Harrison became my ghost in the machine. It did not take long for him to realize the campaign finances were a complete illusion. DeAndre was pouring millions of dollars into television advertisements, luxury campaign buses, and lavish catered events, yet his official donor fundraising numbers were abysmal. The math did not add up. DeAndre was spending triple what he was bringing in. When Harrison quietly audited the internal accounts, he uncovered a massive sloppy money laundering operation. DeAndre was funneling money out of my late father's logistics companies, routing the cash through a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, and then filtering it back into his campaign under the guise of fake consulting fees. It was textbook federal wire fraud, and DeAndre was leaving a digital trail a mile wide. Once Harrison had downloaded the entire financial server onto a secure hard drive, I gave him the green light to pull the ripcord. 2 weeks before my father's death, Harrison staged a massive public argument with DeAndre over campaign strategy and dramatically quit in the middle of the night. DeAndre thought he had simply driven away a demanding employee. He had no idea Harrison had walked out the door carrying the exact evidence required to put him in a federal penitentiary. I plugged the hard drive into Malik's secure laptop and mirrored the screen onto the massive digital display covering the far wall of the conference room. Folders upon folders of financial documents, internal emails, and wire transfer receipts populated the screen. "Look at the dates on these transfers," Malik said, leaning forward in his leather chair, his eyes tracking the rows of data. He was moving $100,000 increments every single week. He did not even bother to use a secure network. He was authorizing offshore wire transfers from his personal cell phone while connected to the public wireless internet at his campaign headquarters. The sheer arrogance is staggering. Arrogance breeds laziness. I replied, pulling up a specific folder labeled Vendor Invoices. Look at how he washed the money. He created a fake community outreach firm registered to Jasmine's maiden name. He billed his own campaign for strategic urban development consulting and then used that clean money to pay off his personal gambling debts and the mortgage on his luxury cars. Malik shook his head in disgust. It is a federal crime to use campaign funds for personal expenses. It is an even bigger federal crime to embezzle corporate assets to fund a political campaign. He is looking at a minimum of 10 years in a federal facility. We are not just handing this over to the authorities in a neat little binder, I said, walking over to the digital display. If we do that, his lawyers will tie the evidence up in court for years. They will file endless motions to suppress the data. They will claim Harrison stole the files illegally. We need to eliminate his ability to fight back. We need to destroy him in the court of public opinion simultaneously. I want him to stand on that stage tomorrow night expecting a coronation only to realize he is at his own execution. We spent the next 4 hours formatting the raw data into a devastating multimedia presentation. We were not just building a legal case, we were producing a psychological weapon. A crowd of wealthy political donors and journalists will not read a spreadsheet, so we had to make the evidence visceral, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. I took the complex banking ledgers and transformed them into sleek, high-contrast visual graphics. I created a slide that displayed the logo of my father's logistics company on the left, a bold red arrow pointing to the Cayman Islands Shell Company in the middle, and another arrow pointing directly to DeAndre's official campaign bank account on the right. Below the arrows, the exact dollar amounts and the corresponding dates flashed in brilliant white text against a pitch-black background. It was simple, brutal, and entirely condemning. Next, we tackled the audio. I pulled up the high-grade recording from my hospital room. Malik used his audio engineering software to isolate the vocal tracks, stripping away the ambient hum of the medical equipment and the hospital hallway. Play it back, I instructed. Malik pressed a button on his keyboard. DeAndre's unhinged voice blasted through the surround sound speakers of the conference room. You are going to sign this paper. You are not going to embarrass me. You are not going to ruin my election. The audio was terrifyingly clear. Then came the sound of the slap. The heavy, wet smack of his hand striking my face echoed off the mahogany walls, followed by the agonizing thud of my body hitting the floor. Even Malik flinched slightly at the raw violence of the playback. When you play that audio in a ballroom filled with his wealthy supporters, Malik said softly, his voice thick with cold anger, the silence in that room is going to be deafening. Every single person writing him a check will instantly realize they are funding a man who beats women in hospital beds. Exactly, I said, my expression entirely hollow. And to make sure Jasmine does not try to play the sympathetic, oblivious wife, we need to add the final piece of the puzzle. I clicked over to a separate folder Harrison had provided. It contained the complete data extraction from DeAndre's secondary campaign cellular phone. Harrison had warned me that DeAndre was incredibly sloppy with his personal communications. I opened a subfolder containing hundreds of text messages exchanged between DeAndre and a 23-year-old campaign aide over the past 5 months. I scrolled through the messages, projecting them onto the wall. They were not subtle. DeAndre had been engaging in a full-blown, highly explicit affair right under Jasmine's nose. He had used campaign funds to book luxury hotel suites in downtown Atlanta, categorizing the expenses as late-night strategy sessions. Jasmine stood by him because she wants the power and the prestige of being a politician's wife, I said, highlighting a particularly damning exchange of messages where DeAndre promised the young aide he would leave Jasmine after the election was secured. She was willing to help him steal my father's money, and she was willing to watch him physically assault me, all to protect her social status. Tomorrow night, I am going to make sure the entire city knows her husband thinks she is completely disposable. Malik let out a sharp breath, leaning back and crossing his arms. You are hitting him from every conceivable angle. Financial fraud, domestic violence, infidelity. You are leaving him absolutely nothing to fall back on. When that presentation hits the screens tomorrow night, his campaign will be dead in seconds. We compiled the graphics, the audio files, and the text message screenshots into a single seamless video file. I formatted the presentation to run on an automated loop. Once the play button was pressed, it could not be paused or minimized without a master administrative password. It was a digital virus designed to hijack the entire audiovisual system of the Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom. I transferred the completed file onto a sleek black flash drive and slipped it into the pocket of my blazer. The weapon was fully forged. We had everything we needed to orchestrate the greatest public relations disaster in the history of Atlanta politics. There is just one technical issue we need to address, Malik said, tapping his pen against the mahogany table. DeAndre is paranoid. He is going to have heavy security at the doors of that gala. His campaign sent out the guest list to the press this afternoon, and your name is obviously not on it. If you try to walk through the front doors of the Grand Plaza Hotel, his private security team will physically block you from entering. How exactly do you plan on getting inside the ballroom to access the audio-visual control board? I looked at Malik, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. Let me worry about the logistics of getting inside the building. DeAndre and Brenda have spent their entire lives underestimating my resources. Tomorrow night, they are going to learn that I do not just manage crises, I engineer them. Saturday morning arrived with a tense electric energy. The campaign gala was scheduled to begin at 6 o'clock in the evening, with DeAndre's major family announcement slated for exactly 8. Malik and I were sitting at the kitchen island in my penthouse condo, running a final diagnostic check on the black flash drive, when a sharp, unexpected knock echoed from my front door. I glanced at the digital clock on the stove. It was exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, just 5 hours until the event. I walked over to the door and checked the security monitor. A man in a plain gray polo shirt and khaki pants was standing in the hallway holding a thick manila envelope. I did not recognize him, but I recognized his posture. He had the stiff, practiced stance of a legal process server. I opened the door. "Are you Camille?" he asked, holding the envelope forward. "I am," I replied smoothly. "You have been served," he said, pressing the envelope into my hands before immediately turning on his heel and walking toward the elevators. I closed the door, my expression entirely neutral, and carried the envelope back to the kitchen island. Malik looked up from his laptop, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the seal of the Fulton County Court on the outside of the paper. "What did he do now?" Malik asked, reaching his hand out. I handed him the envelope. Malik tore it open and quickly scanned the first page. Within seconds, the blood drained completely from his face. He slammed the document down onto the marble countertop with a force that made the coffee cups rattle. "He got a judge to issue an emergency ex parte temporary restraining order," Malik said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "It is signed by Abernathy again. DeAndre and Jasmine went to the courthouse this morning and filed a sworn affidavit claiming you physically threatened Jasmine's life during the country club brunch yesterday. They claimed you showed up uninvited, cornered her at her table, and told her you were going to destroy her." I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. Technically, I did tell her I was going to destroy her reality, but I did not threaten her physical safety. She is weaponizing her own panic. It does not matter what actually happened. Malik fired back, running a hand over his face. Abernathy granted the order based on their sworn statements. You are legally barred from coming within 500 feet of DeAndre, Jasmine, or Brenda, and more importantly, the order specifically bars you from entering any venue where DeAndre is hosting an official campaign event. Malik began pacing the length of my kitchen, his legal mind racing to comprehend the roadblock. He outplayed us on the logistics, Camille. He knows you would never miss a chance to confront him, so he built a legal wall around the Grand Plaza Hotel. If you step foot anywhere near that ballroom tonight, his private security team will not just turn you away. They will immediately call the Atlanta Police Department. You will be arrested on the spot for violating a direct court order. You will be sitting in a holding cell while he stands on that stage and lies to the entire city. I picked up the restraining order and read through the standard legal boilerplate. It was a desperate, brilliant move. DeAndre was terrified of the Cayman Islands ledger. He did not know if I actually had the resources to expose him, but he was not willing to take the risk of me showing up at the gala and causing a scene. By securing the restraining order, he had guaranteed himself a completely captive, uninterrupted audience for his fake victory speech. "We cannot do it live," Malik concluded, stopping his pacing and leaning heavily against the counter. "We cannot risk you getting arrested. A mugshot of you in handcuffs would completely validate his entire narrative that you are unstable and violent. We have to pivot. We can mass email the video presentation to every journalist in attendance right as he takes the stage." I shook my head immediately. "Absolutely not. If we email the file, half of the reporters will not check their phones in time. The others will assume it is a digital deep fake orchestrated by a rival campaign. DeAndre will have time to spin it. He will have his crisis team issue a denial before the night is over. The only way to permanently destroy a narcissist is to shatter their image in real time in front of the people they respect the most with absolutely nowhere to run. It has to be on those massive projection screens." Malik threw his hands up in frustration. "And how do you propose we do that? I cannot operate the audiovisual board myself. I do not have the technical clearance, and the hotel staff will not let a random lawyer into the sound booth. DeAndre has completely locked you out." I looked at Malik and let out a soft, genuine laugh. Malik stared at me completely baffled by my reaction. "Why are you smiling?" "We are legally locked out of the venue 5 hours before the execution." "Because DeAndre is an arrogant fool who never pays attention to the details of his own spending," I said, walking out of the kitchen and heading toward my master bedroom. "Follow me." Malik trailed behind me as I walked into my expansive walk-in closet. I reached to the very back of the clothing rack and pulled out a pristine, tailored emerald green power suit encased in a protective garment bag. I unzipped the bag and laid the suit carefully across the center island of the closet. "What are you doing?" Malik asked. "I am getting ready for the gala," I replied, turning to face him. "Let me ask you a question, Malik. When DeAndre was planning this massive opulent event to impress his wealthy conservative donors, who did he hire to cater the food?" Malik frowned, confused by the sudden change in topic. "I do not know. He was bragging on social media last week about securing Lux plates. They are the most exclusive, expensive catering company in the Southeast. I saw the vendor invoice on Harrison's hard drive. DeAndre paid them over $200,000 for the night." I nodded slowly. "Lux Plates is indeed the most exclusive catering company in Atlanta. Their waitstaff wear custom tuxedos, they serve imported caviar, and they are notoriously difficult to book. DeAndre blew a massive hole in his remaining campaign budget just to secure them because he believes proximity to luxury makes him look legitimate." I walked over to my jewelry cabinet and opened a small, velvet-lined drawer. But what DeAndre does not know, and what very few people in this city know, is the corporate structure behind Lux Plates. I pulled out a heavy matte black security keycard and held it up. 3 years ago, the original founder of Lux Plates ran into a catastrophic financial crisis. He had overextended his credit lines to expand into corporate events, and a massive supply chain failure nearly bankrupted him. He came to my public relations firm, terrified that the news of his insolvency would leak to the press and destroy his brand. Malik was staring at the black keycard in my hand, his legal mind slowly connecting the dots. I did not just manage his public relations crisis. I continued. I saw a brilliant business with a temporary cash flow problem, so I used my shadow holding company in Delaware to quietly inject $3 million into his operations. In exchange for saving his company from absolute ruin, I took a silent 51% majority ownership stake in Lux Plates. Malik's jaw dropped. "You own the catering company. I am the legal majority owner." I confirmed, a cold smile spreading across my face. DeAndre literally used the money he embezzled from my father's business to pay my catering company to host his political gala. He funded my operations so I could orchestrate his downfall. Malik let out a loud, echoing laugh of pure disbelief. "He paid you. He actually paid you to cater his own destruction. But how does that solve the restraining order? If you get within 500 feet, you are still in violation. I held up a finger. That is where the legal nuance of the hospitality industry comes into play. The temporary restraining order bars Camille, the private citizen and estranged family member, from attending DeAndre's event as a guest. It bars me from interacting with him. But the Grand Plaza Hotel is a commercial venue. Tonight, my catering company is the contracted primary vendor operating within that commercial space. As the majority owner and chief executive of that vendor, I have absolute, unimpeded legal authority to be on the premises, to inspect my staff and oversee my business operations. Malik immediately recognized the loophole. It is an occupational exemption. As long as you are entering through the employee access points and functioning as the vendor, his personal restraining order cannot supersede your commercial right to access your own contracted worksite. If his security team tries to have you arrested, they are actively interfering with a multi-$100,000 commercial contract, which exposes both DeAndre and the hotel to a massive civil liability lawsuit. Exactly, I said, slipping the black keycard into the pocket of the emerald green blazer. I am not walking through the grand front doors of the hotel where his personal security guards are holding clipboards and checking guest lists. I am driving my car into the subterranean loading dock. I am swiping this master keycard, which grants me access to the service elevators, the commercial kitchens, and the secure catwalks. DeAndre's guards work for him. The hotel security works for the venue. And tonight the venue answers to me because I am providing the entire infrastructure for their event. We spent the next hour reviewing the architectural blueprints of the Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom, which I had easily obtained from my catering logistics team. The layout was perfect. The main ballroom floor would hold 500 guests, dozens of media cameras, and a massive stage. Directly above the stage, suspended in a glass-enclosed balcony, was the master audiovisual control booth. The only way to access that booth without walking through the main ballroom was to take the rear service elevator from the kitchen up to the fourth-floor catwalk. I will enter through the loading dock at exactly 7 o'clock. I instructed Malik, pointing to the blueprint. The event starts at 6, but the first hour is just cocktails and networking. DeAndre will not take the stage for his big announcement until 8. That gives me a full hour to bypass the kitchen, take the service elevator, and secure the audiovisual booth. And what about me? Malik asked. You are going to walk right through the front door as a paying guest, I replied. Harrison bought a VIP ticket under a corporate alias before he quit the campaign. I transferred it to your name this morning. You are going to stand in the back of the room, sip a glass of expensive champagne that my company provided, and wait for the show to begin. And the authorities, Malik pressed his tone, shifting back to absolute seriousness. I have a contact at the local field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I said. I will send him the encrypted files containing the wire fraud evidence at exactly 7:30. By the time DeAndre takes the stage at 8, the federal agents will have already verified the offshore account numbers. They will be waiting outside the ballroom doors before DeAndre even finishes his speech. Malik nodded, fully satisfied with the airtight nature of the plan. He looked at the emerald green suit resting on the island, then looked at me. He thinks he silenced you today, Camille. I turned to the mirror, smoothing my hair back into a sharp, uncompromising style. Let him think that. The loudest sound in the world is the silence right before the hammer drops. Tonight, my stepbrother is going to learn the difference between running a political campaign and fighting a public relations war. He brought a restraining order to a battlefield. I brought the entire venue. The Atlanta evening air was thick as I drove my dark sedan past the glittering main entrance of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Valets were rushing to open the doors of luxury vehicles. I saw a line of local news vans parked along the curb, their satellite dishes raised toward the darkening sky. DeAndre had truly pulled out all the stops to ensure his fake triumph was broadcast to the entire city. I kept driving, turning down a narrow, dimly lit alleyway that led to the subterranean levels of the building. The loading dock was a massive concrete cavern filled with delivery trucks and industrial dumpsters. Two heavy-set private security guards stood by the reinforced steel service doors, holding clipboards and looking bored. They were hotel staff, not DeAndre's private detail. I parked my car in a space reserved for vendor management, stepped out, and smoothed the lapels of my emerald green suit. The color was intentional. It was bold, unapologetic, and commanded absolute authority. I walked directly toward the security guards, holding the black master keycard in my right hand. The taller guard stepped forward, raising his hand to stop me. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his eyes scanning my tailored suit, clearly confused as to why a woman dressed for a high society gala was wandering around a damp loading dock. "This entrance is strictly for authorized vendors and hotel staff. Guest entry is around the front." I did not slow my pace. I held up the black keycard so the barcode caught the harsh fluorescent light. "I am the majority owner of Lux Plates," I stated clearly, projecting my voice so it echoed off the concrete walls. "We are the primary caterer for the event upstairs. I am here to conduct a quality assurance inspection on my staff." The guard looked at the black keycard, recognized the master vendor clearance level, and immediately stepped aside. "Have a good evening, ma'am," he muttered, swiping his own badge to unlock the heavy steel door for me. I stepped over the threshold and walked straight into the pulsing heart of the commercial kitchen. The transition from the quiet loading dock to the kitchen was like stepping into a different dimension. The air was thick with the scent of roasted garlic, expensive truffles, and sizzling meats. Dozens of chefs and line cooks wearing pristine white uniforms with the Lux Plates logo embroidered in gold were moving in a frantic, highly synchronized dance. Stainless steel pans clattered against industrial stoves. Waiters in custom black tuxedos rushed back and forth loading silver trays with delicate hors d'oeuvres. Nobody stopped me. Nobody questioned my presence. In the hospitality industry, a person walking with absolute purpose through a kitchen while wearing an expensive suit is immediately recognized as ownership. The head chef, a temperamental man I had personally approved for the position 2 years ago, caught my eye from across the expediting counter. He gave me a sharp, respectful nod before turning back to yell an order at his sous chef. I checked my phone. It was 7:15. Malik sent a secure text message. "I am inside the ballroom," Malik's text read. "DeAndre is holding court near the center bar. He is taking pictures with the mayor and 2 local news anchors. Jasmine is working the crowd by the front stage. They both look like they just won the lottery." I smiled and slipped the phone back into my pocket. They were drunk on their own manufactured reality. They were standing in a room financed by stolen money, eating food provided by the sister they had assaulted, and smiling for cameras that were about to broadcast their absolute destruction. I bypassed the main kitchen exit and walked toward the heavy freight elevators reserved for moving massive audiovisual equipment. I swiped my black keycard over the reader. The heavy metal doors slid open. I stepped inside and hit the button for the 4th-floor catwalks. The elevator ride was slow and vibrating, a stark contrast to the smooth glass elevators the guests were taking in the front of the house. When the doors finally parted, I stepped out into the hidden superstructure of the Grand Plaza Hotel. The catwalks were a network of suspended metal grating that hung directly above the decorative ceiling of the grand ballroom. It was dark, hot, and smelled of ozone and hot electrical wires. I walked quietly along the metal grating, my heels making soft clicking sounds that were completely drowned out by the muffled roar of the 500 guests mingling below. Every few feet, a massive lighting rig or a cluster of heavy speakers pointed down through the gaps in the ceiling architecture. I approached a large soundproof glass partition built into the wall overlooking the entire ballroom. This was the master audiovisual control booth. I opened the heavy door and stepped inside. The air conditioning in the booth was frigid. A massive electronic console covered the length of the room, glowing with hundreds of colorful sliders, buttons, and digital monitors. 2 technicians wearing black polo shirts were sitting at the console, monitoring the wireless microphone frequencies and adjusting the ambient room lighting. As a standard operating procedure for elite events, Lux Plates did not just provide food, we provided full-scale event management, which included subcontracting the audio-visual technicians. These men were paid by my company. They both turned around in their rolling chairs as I entered the booth. The senior technician, a man in his late 40s with a headset wrapped around his neck, frowned. "Mom, you cannot be in here," the technician said, standing up. "This is a restricted operational area." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the sleek black flash drive, and placed it on the console right next to the master projection controls. "I am Camille, the majority owner of the vendor network paying your invoices tonight. I need you to load this drive into the primary projection queue." The technicians exchanged a nervous glance. The senior tech looked from the flash drive to my face. "We were given a strict run of show schedule by the campaign manager," he explained cautiously. "There is no external video presentation listed on the official docket for tonight. DeAndre is just giving a live speech. There has been a sudden change in the campaign strategy," I said, my voice leaving absolutely no room for debate. "The presentation on that drive is the cornerstone of the candidate's major family announcement. If it is not loaded and ready to play the exact second he takes the stage, this entire event is a failure. And I assure you, if this event fails, Lux Plates will not be issuing your final payment." The threat of a withheld payment in the event production industry is the ultimate motivator. The senior technician did not argue further. He picked up the flash drive, plugged it into the master server, and typed in a series of commands on his keyboard. A small monitor to my left flickered, displaying the opening frame of the video Malik and I had created in the conference room. The bold white text against the black background was queued up perfectly. "It is locked into the main system," the technician said, stepping back from the board. "When do you want us to trigger the playback?" I walked around the console and stood directly in front of the massive glass window, looking down at the ballroom. From this vantage point, I had a godlike view of the entire event. I could see the sparkling crystal chandeliers, the lavish floral arrangements, and the sea of wealthy donors completely oblivious to the trap they had walked into. "Step away from the control board," I instructed both technicians without taking my eyes off the crowd below. "I will trigger the playback myself." They hesitated for a fraction of a second before complying, moving to the back of the booth and crossing their arms. They recognized that something highly unusual was happening, but they were paid to push buttons, not ask questions. I rested my hands on the cool metal edge of the console. I scanned the room below and quickly located the key players. Brenda was sitting at a VIP table near the front row, wearing a glittering silver gown and sipping champagne with the wives of two prominent real estate developers. Jasmine was near the stage stairs, talking aggressively to a frantic event coordinator. And then I saw him. DeAndre was standing in the very center of the room, surrounded by a tight circle of reporters holding microphones and voice recorders. He was laughing, tossing his head back, playing the role of the charismatic statesman flawlessly. He looked invincible. He looked like a man who believed he had completely outsmarted the world. I checked my watch. It was exactly 7:30. I pulled out my phone and opened a secure messaging application. I selected the contact for Special Agent Davis at the Atlanta field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We had spoken earlier that afternoon, and he had been waiting on standby for my signal. I attached the massive encrypted folder containing Harrison's stolen campaign servers, the Cayman Islands ledger, and the fabricated vendor invoices. I typed a single sentence to accompany the data transfer. "The suspect is currently located at the Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom." I pressed send. I watched the progress bar quickly fill the screen until a small green checkmark appeared, confirming the massive trove of federal evidence was now sitting on the desk of a senior federal agent. The authorities had exactly 30 minutes to review the data, secure their warrants, and dispatch a team to the hotel before DeAndre even finished clearing his throat on that stage. The first domino had just been tipped over. I slid the phone back into my pocket and placed my finger gently on the master playback button on the control console. Below me, the lights in the ballroom began to dim, signaling the transition from the cocktail hour to the main program. The low hum of 500 conversations slowly quieted down as a soft spotlight illuminated the center of the massive stage. Jasmine hurried to her seat next to Brenda, smoothing her dress and putting on a wide, practiced smile for the cameras. The crowd directed their attention toward the podium. I stood in the cold, dark booth, surrounded by glowing monitors, holding the digital trigger that would end my stepbrother's life as he knew it. He had demanded my surrender. He had tried to legally banish me from the room. He had no idea I was the one controlling the lights. The spotlight tracked DeAndre as he confidently strode across the stage toward the clear acrylic podium. The ballroom erupted into polite, wealthy applause. Men in expensive tuxedos and women in glittering evening gowns directed their undivided attention to the man who was actively defrauding them. DeAndre adjusted the microphone, offering the crowd a practiced, humble smile that completely masked the arrogant predator lurking underneath. "Thank you," DeAndre said, his voice echoing smoothly through the high-definition speakers suspended directly in front of my control booth. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Looking out at this incredible crowd, I am reminded of why I decided to run for city council in the first place. I see community leaders, I see innovators, and most importantly, I see family. I stood in the darkness of the audiovisual booth, my hands resting lightly on the control console. The two technicians stood behind me in total silence, watching the monitor. DeAndre gripped the edges of the podium, bowing his head slightly to simulate an emotional burden. As many of you know, this past month has been one of the most difficult periods of my life. Losing my father Warren was a devastating blow to our family. He was a titan of industry, a man who built a legacy of hard work, integrity, and absolute dedication to this great city. He paused perfectly, allowing a wave of sympathetic murmurs to ripple through the ballroom. I looked down at the front row. Brenda was dabbing the corner of her eye with a tissue, playing the grieving widow with Oscar-worthy precision. Jasmine was nodding solemnly, her posture perfectly straight for the press cameras lined up along the side walls. "It has not been easy." DeAndre continued, his tone shifting from sorrow to a manufactured resilience. "There have been rumors circulating in the press. There have been unfortunate, painful family disagreements that have spilled into the public eye. When a great man leaves behind a massive legacy, the stress can sometimes overwhelm the people who are struggling to process their grief. But my family believes in forgiveness. We believe in moving forward, and we believe in honoring my father's vision for the future of Atlanta." I felt a cold rush of adrenaline course through my veins. He was laying the groundwork. He was painting my fabricated surrender as a tragic consequence of grief, positioning himself as the benevolent patriarch who was gracefully picking up the pieces. "That is why tonight is so special," DeAndre said, raising his voice slightly, injecting it with triumphant energy. "Tonight is not just about a political campaign. Tonight is about healing. I invited all of you here to make a major family announcement. After weeks of difficult conversations and legal mediation, I am proud to announce that our family has reached a unified resolution regarding the estate." He paused, flashing a brilliant, victorious smile to the crowd. "And with that resolution, my campaign will be spearheading a massive multi-million-dollar charitable endowment aimed at rebuilding our urban infrastructure, funded entirely by my father's trust." The crowd broke into enthusiastic applause. Camera flashes illuminated the ballroom like miniature lightning strikes. DeAndre was basking in the glory, absorbing the adoration of the elite donors who believed they were witnessing the birth of a philanthropic dynasty. He had taken his victory lap. He had climbed to the absolute highest peak of his own arrogance. It was time to push him off the edge. I did not cut his microphone. I wanted every stutter, every gasp, and every panicked breath broadcast to the entire room. I simply reached out and pressed the master playback button on the console. Instantly, the massive 20-foot LED screens forming the entire backdrop of the stage went completely black. The sudden absence of ambient light caused a brief, disorienting shadow to fall over the stage. DeAndre did not notice immediately. He was still looking out at the crowd, soaking in the applause. Then the presentation began. The screens flared to life with brilliant, blinding white text against a pitch-black background. There were no campaign logos. There were no pictures of his smiling face. There was only a massive high-contrast graphic displaying the official corporate seal of my father's logistics company. A sharp electronic hum resonated through the sound system, cutting through the applause. The crowd fell silent, their eyes drifting from DeAndre to the massive screens behind him. A bold red arrow appeared on the screen pointing from my father's company logo to a new text box. The box read, Cayman Islands Shell Corporation Authorized Signatory DeAndre. Below the text, a pristine high-resolution photograph of the offshore banking ledger appeared. It was the exact same photograph I had slid across the table to Jasmine at the country club. The numbers were massive, undeniable, and entirely visible to every single person in the room. $4.2 million. DeAndre continued smiling at the crowd, confused as to why the applause had suddenly died out. He tapped the side of his podium, thinking perhaps the microphone had cut out. "Thank you," he repeated, his voice booming through the speakers. But nobody was looking at him anymore. 500 pairs of eyes were completely locked onto the digital execution playing out behind his back. The presentation transitioned automatically. The screen wiped clean and displayed a new graphic. This time it showed the Cayman Islands Shell Company with an arrow pointing directly to the official bank account of DeAndre's city council campaign. Beside the arrow, dozens of wire transfer receipts began to scroll rapidly up the screen. The dates of the transfers perfectly aligned with the dates of his most expensive campaign television advertisements. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. It was not a subtle sound. It was the visceral, immediate reaction of wealthy donors realizing they were attending a gala funded by stolen corporate assets. I watched the local journalists spring into action. The press corps, who had been lazily recording the speech for the morning news cycle, suddenly realized they were witnessing the political scandal of the decade. Cameramen shoved their way to the front of the stage, zooming their lenses in on the massive offshore banking receipts. Reporters began furiously typing on their phones. Down on the floor, Malik raised his glass of champagne toward the audiovisual booth, a dark, satisfied smile resting on his face. DeAndre finally felt the atmospheric pressure in the room shift. He noticed the reporters rushing the stage. He saw the wealthy real estate developers in the front row whispering frantically to each other, their faces twisted in disgust. DeAndre looked down at Jasmine for reassurance. Jasmine was not smiling. She was sitting rigidly in her chair, her face completely drained of blood. She was staring at the massive LED screen with an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. She recognized the Cayman Islands ledger. She knew exactly what was happening, and she knew she was completely powerless to stop it. "What is going on?" DeAndre muttered into the live microphone, the sound carrying perfectly across the silent ballroom. He turned around. He craned his neck, looking up at the 20-foot screens just as the presentation transitioned to its most damning segment. The screen displayed a series of fabricated vendor invoices. The invoices were billed to a community outreach consulting firm registered under Jasmine's maiden name. A red line struck through the consulting description, replacing it with the actual destinations of the money. The screen flashed the irrefutable proof. Hundreds of thousands of dollars routed from the campaign accounts directly to high-stakes underground gambling syndicates. Another $80,000 routed to pay the mortgage on his luxury vehicles. The exact routing numbers, the dates, and the digital signatures were plastered across the wall in 10-foot-high letters. DeAndre froze. His entire body locked up as if he had been struck by lightning. His hands, which had been resting confidently on the edge of the acrylic podium, began to tremble so violently that the microphone stand rattled. "Turn it off." DeAndre stammered into the microphone, his voice cracking into a high, panicked pitch. He looked frantically toward the side of the stage where his campaign staff was standing. "Turn it off right now. Cut the feed." His campaign manager, a young man who had replaced Harrison just a few weeks ago, was staring at the screens with his mouth wide open, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic legal liability unfolding in front of him. The crowd erupted into chaos. A prominent city official sitting near the front row abruptly stood up, threw his cloth napkin onto the table, and began walking briskly toward the exit. Dozens of others followed suit, desperate to flee the room before the scandal could splatter onto their own reputations. The sound of scraping chairs and panicked shouting filled the massive space. Brenda finally realized what she was looking at. She stood up, her silver gown shimmering under the harsh camera lights, and pointed a trembling finger at the stage. "DeAndre." "What is that?" she screamed over the noise of the crowd. "What does that mean?" DeAndre ignored his mother. He grabbed the microphone, ripping it from its stand. "This is a lie," he shouted, his voice echoing frantically over the chaos. "This is a coordinated attack. My political opponents hacked the system. None of this is real." But the evidence on the screen was too detailed, too pristine, and too overwhelming to be dismissed as a simple political prank. The journalists knew what genuine banking records looked like. The donors knew what wire fraud looked like. They were watching a man desperately trying to plug a dam that had already completely collapsed. I stood in the cold audiovisual booth, watching him squirm under the crushing weight of his own actions. He was watching his political career, his freedom, and his entire fabricated identity burned to the ground in front of 500 people. But I was not finished. The financial ruin was just the opening act. It was time to destroy the very last shred of his humanity in front of the woman he had used to justify his crimes. DeAndre was gripping the broken microphone, his knuckles white, shouting over the rising din of the ballroom that this was a coordinated cyber attack. He was desperately trying to herd the wealthy donors back into his manufactured reality, sweating profusely under the harsh stage lights as he claimed political opponents had hacked the hotel's servers. He was looking for any lifeline, any excuse to survive the next 5 minutes. I did not give him the time to formulate a cohesive lie. I moved my hand across the control console and dragged the audio file directly into the primary playback queue. The massive surround sound system of the Grand Plaza Hotel was designed for concert-grade acoustics. It was built to amplify music and speeches to the furthest corners of the expansive room. When I pressed the master play button, DeAndre's voice did not just echo. It reverberated through the floorboards and rattled the crystal chandeliers overhead. "You are going to sign this paper!" The recorded voice of DeAndre boomed from the speakers, raw and dripping with malice. "You are not going to embarrass me. You are not going to ruin my election." The crowd immediately stopped moving. The wealthy real estate developers, the influential socialites, the bustling waitstaff, and the aggressive journalists. Every single person in the room froze in their tracks. The absolute terror of hearing a private violent threat broadcast at a high society gala paralyzed them. "I told you to leave," my own recorded voice echoed back, calm and steady, despite the circumstances. Then came the climax of the audio. The sickening, heavy smack of a grown man striking a woman across the face blasted through the ballroom. It was followed instantly by the agonizing thud of my body hitting the hospital floor and my sharp gasp of pain. The recording finished with DeAndre snarling that I thought I was too good for the family. The silence that followed in the ballroom was heavier than concrete. The cyber attack excuse DeAndre was trying to spin instantly evaporated into thin air. You can fake a banking spreadsheet if you have enough technical skills, but you cannot deep fake the raw, guttural violence of a man attacking his sister in a hospital recovery room. The acoustics of the slap, the undeniable sound of his specific voice, and the brutal reality of the domestic assault stripped away every last ounce of his political armor. A woman standing in the second row covered her mouth, a quiet sob of horror escaping her lips. The mayor of Atlanta, who had been posing for photographs with DeAndre just 30 minutes ago, turned his back entirely. He gestured sharply to a security detail, signaling them to escort him out of the room immediately. Nobody wanted to be caught in the blast radius of a man who beat women to fund his political ambitions. DeAndre stood on the stage, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He dropped the broken microphone. It hit the acrylic podium and rolled off, clattering loudly against the stage floor. He looked at the crowd, his eyes wide and pleading, but he found absolutely zero sympathy. He looked at the reporters, and the camera flashes blinded him. They were documenting his absolute ruin in real time. Brenda looked like she was going to collapse. She was gripping the edge of her VIP table, her silver gown trembling as she stared up at her son. The carefully crafted illusion of her perfect wealthy family had just been violently shattered in front of the exact country club peers she spent her entire life trying to impress. But Jasmine was still standing perfectly rigid. She had known about the assault. She had been in the hospital room. She had helped him cover it up, lying directly to the police officers to protect her future as a powerful political wife. She had tolerated the financial crimes and the violence because she believed DeAndre was going to elevate her social status. I looked down at her from the cold darkness of the audiovisual booth. It was time to show her exactly what her twisted loyalty had bought her. I tapped the next sequence on my keyboard. The massive 20-foot LED screens behind DeAndre wiped away the Cayman Islands banking records. The wall went pitch black for a fraction of a second before flashing an entirely new set of high-contrast graphics. The entire stage backdrop was suddenly plastered with massive high-resolution screenshots of text messages. The contact name at the very top of the projected messages read, "Late Night Strategy." The messages were not subtle. They were brazen, highly explicit, and utterly devastating. The timestamps displayed next to the text bubbles proved these conversations were happening at 2 o'clock in the morning while Jasmine was asleep in their master bedroom. The crowd began to read the messages, the shocked whispers turning into a tidal wave of scandalous realization. The screenshots revealed DeAndre communicating with a 23-year-old campaign aide. He was making promises. Explicit promises to leave his wife the minute the election results were certified. One text message blown up to the size of a billboard showed DeAndre calling Jasmine a necessary political prop who was too expensive to keep around. Another message showed him promising the young aide that once he forced his sister to sign over the trust fund, the money would be theirs to spend on a private vacation to Monaco. Jasmine stood in the front row, her eyes darting back and forth as she read the glowing letters towering over her husband. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll about to shatter under extreme pressure. She had compromised her entire moral compass for this man. She had threatened me. She had mocked my independence. She had done it all because she thought she was the mastermind partner in his rise to power. Sitting in that ballroom surrounded by 500 elite members of Atlanta society, Jasmine finally realized she was not a partner. She was a disposable stepping stone. The crystal champagne flute in Jasmine's hands slipped from her trembling fingers. It hit the polished hardwood floor, shattering into 100 glittering pieces. The sharp, sudden sound of the breaking glass cut through the murmurs of the horrified crowd. Jasmine did not look down at the mess. She slowly raised her head and looked up at DeAndre. The pure, unadulterated rage burning in her eyes was terrifying to witness. She did not care about the news cameras anymore. She did not care about maintaining her composure for the wealthy donors. The carefully constructed mask of the perfect political wife completely melted away, leaving only a furious, betrayed woman. Jasmine marched directly toward the stage. She climbed the carpeted stairs with heavy, aggressive steps. DeAndre turned around, realizing his wife was approaching him. He raised his hands, backing away from the podium. "Jasmine, please," he pleaded, his voice cracking over the ambient noise of the ruined gala. "Jasmine, listen to me. It is a setup. None of this is real." Jasmine did not pause. She walked right up to him, raised her hand, and slapped him across the face with every ounce of strength she possessed. The sound echoed through the room, a poetic echo of the violence he had inflicted on me just days prior. DeAndre stumbled backward, clutching his cheek, his eyes wide with shock. The camera shutters from the press pool went into overdrive, capturing the spectacular domestic implosion of the city council candidate. "You pathetic, lying coward," Jasmine screamed at him, her voice raw and entirely unhinged. "I lied for you. I covered for you. You used me." She lunged at him again, grabbing the lapels of his expensive navy suit and shoving him hard against the acrylic podium. The podium tipped over, crashing off the front of the stage and shattering on the floor below. Campaign staff members finally broke out of their paralyzed state and rushed the stage trying to pull a screaming Jasmine away from her husband. Down on the main floor, the exodus had officially begun. The donors were practically sprinting toward the exit doors, terrified of being photographed anywhere near the collapsing candidate. Malik was standing near the back bar, calmly watching the chaos unfold. He looked up at the audiovisual booth and gave me a slow, respectful nod. The legal and public relations warfare we had engineered was executing flawlessly. I stood over the control board watching the security guards struggle to restrain Jasmine while DeAndre cowered near the back curtain. I had systematically dismantled his finances, his reputation, his campaign, and his marriage in less than 10 minutes. I had stripped away every single layer of protection he possessed, leaving him completely exposed to the consequences of his own arrogance. But the final curtain had not dropped yet. I checked my watch. It was exactly 8 o'clock. The 30 minutes I had given the federal authorities were up. DeAndre was currently panicking over the end of his political career and his marriage, completely unaware that he was about to lose his physical freedom. The heavy steel doors of the Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom were about to open one last time. The ballroom was a theater of absolute destruction. The stampede of Atlanta elite was almost deafening. Women in expensive gowns tripped over discarded chairs and abandoned their designer clutches. Men in tailored tuxedos shoved their way toward the exits, leaving behind their half-eaten caviar and their fragile political alliances. Nobody wanted their face captured in the background of a media circus that involved federal financial crimes, stolen trust funds, and illicit affairs. The local journalists, however, were not retreating. They were advancing like sharks smelling blood in the water. They formed a tight, impenetrable barricade around the front of the stage. The camera flashes were blinding, a continuous strobe light illuminating DeAndre's utter collapse. He was backed into the far corner of the stage, his hands raised in a pathetic attempt to shield his sweating face from the high-definition lenses. Two campaign staffers were physically dragging Jasmine down the stage stairs. Her floral dress was torn at the shoulder, her perfectly styled hair was a wild mess, and she was still screaming obscenities at her husband that the reporters were happily recording for the morning broadcast. Amidst the chaos, Brenda stood completely frozen at her VIP table. Her shimmering silver gown looked entirely out of place in the middle of the disaster zone. She was looking frantically around the room, desperately searching for the source of the nightmare. She turned around, looking past the fleeing donors, and her eyes followed the bright beam of the projector all the way up to the glass-enclosed audio-visual booth on the fourth-floor catwalk. The glow of the control console illuminated my face in the darkness. Even through the soundproof glass in the distance, I saw the exact moment recognition hit her. Her jaw dropped. Her hands began to shake violently. Brenda did not run toward the exit with the rest of the wealthy socialites. She picked up the heavy skirts of her silver gown and sprinted toward the rear service doors. I watched her disappear into the back hallway, knowing exactly where she was heading. She was coming to the booth. The two technicians standing behind me nervously shifted their weight. One of them reached for the door handle to lock it, clearly terrified of an impending physical altercation. I shook my head, stopping him immediately. "Let her in," I instructed calmly. "She needs a front row seat for the finale." Less than a minute later, the heavy metal door to the audiovisual booth was thrown open. Brenda stood in the doorway, gasping for air. Her chest was heaving. Her expensive makeup was smeared with tears of panic and exertion. She took one look at the massive 20-foot screens projecting her son's offshore bank accounts, and then she looked at me standing smoothly by the control board in my emerald green suit. "Camille," she choked out, stepping into the frigid air of the booth. "What are you doing? Turn it off. You have to turn it off right now. You are destroying him." I kept my hands resting lightly on the edge of the console, my posture perfectly straight. "I am not destroying him, Brenda. He destroyed himself. I am just providing the lighting." She ran forward, grabbing my forearm with her manicured hands. Her grip was tight and desperate. Her long fingernails dug into the fabric of my suit. "Please," she sobbed, the arrogant country club matriarch, completely replaced by a terrified begging woman. "I will do whatever you want. We will sign the estate over to you tomorrow morning. We will drop the elder abuse charges. Just shut down the screens and tell the press it was a mistake. We are family, Camille. We are family." I looked down at her hands clutching my sleeve. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no remorse, no hesitation. I slowly pulled my arm away from her grip, stepping back so she was forced to look me directly in the eyes. "Family does not leave you bleeding on a cold hospital floor," I said, my voice dropping to a sharp, icy whisper that cut straight through her hysterical sobbing. "Family does not try to lock you in a psychiatric ward to steal a dead man's money. Family does not freeze your bank accounts and try to starve your employees out of sheer greed." I gestured toward the massive glass window overlooking the ruined ballroom. "I am not your family, Brenda," I said, delivering the cold truth with absolute precision. "I am a public relations executive, and right now I am just doing my job. This is crisis management." Before Brenda could formulate another desperate plea, a loud booming voice echoed from the main floor below, cutting through the shouting reporters and the fleeing guests. "Federal agents, clear the room!" I looked down through the glass partition. The heavy steel doors at the grand entrance had been thrust wide open. A team of 6 men and women, wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI printed across the back, marched into the ballroom. They moved with absolute tactical precision, parting the sea of remaining guests and aggressive journalists like a knife slicing through water. Leading the federal procession was Malik. My attorney walked with his shoulders squared, his expensive suit immaculate, looking every bit the legal shark he was. He pointed directly toward the stage where DeAndre was still cowering behind the fallen acrylic podium. Special Agent Davis, a tall, imposing man with a stern face, stepped forward. He did not care about the flashing cameras. He did not care about the opulent decorations or the political nature of the event. He was holding a stack of freshly signed federal arrest warrants. The agents quickly ascended the stage stairs. DeAndre tried to back away, his hands raised in surrender, but his back hit the heavy velvet curtains. He had absolutely nowhere left to run. DeAndre Special Agent Davis announced, his voice carrying clearly over the ambient noise of the room. "You are under arrest for federal campaign finance fraud, wire fraud, and the embezzlement of corporate assets. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." DeAndre began to hyperventilate. His knees buckled slightly, his perfectly groomed political facade completely shattering. "No, wait, you have the wrong information. This is a misunderstanding. I am a city council candidate. You cannot do this to me. Let me call my lawyer." The agents did not hesitate. 2 of them stepped forward, grabbing his arms and forcefully spinning him around to face the massive LED screens broadcasting his crimes. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping around his wrists echoed through the room. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. The press corps went absolutely feral. They surged forward, their cameras pressed against the edge of the stage, capturing every single angle of the wealthy, arrogant politician being frog-marched off his own stage in federal handcuffs. Jasmine, who was still being restrained by the campaign staff near the side exit, watched her husband being taken away by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She did not cry for him. She covered her face with her hands, knowing her own social and financial ruin was permanently tied to the man in handcuffs. Beside me in the audiovisual booth, Brenda let out a guttural, agonizing wail. She collapsed to her knees on the hard floor, her hands covering her face as she sobbed uncontrollably. She watched her golden child, the son she had prioritized over everyone else, the son she had enabled and protected for decades, being escorted out the back doors of the Grand Plaza Hotel by federal authorities. His political campaign was over. His marriage was over. His freedom was entirely gone. I looked at Brenda, kneeling on the floor, weeping over the ashes of her shattered empire. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the sleek black keycard, and handed it to the senior audiovisual technician. "Keep the presentation running on a continuous loop until the ballroom is completely empty," I instructed him calmly. And make sure the press gets a clear shot of those offshore account numbers for the morning papers. I turned my back on my stepmother, walked out of the frigid control booth, and headed toward the service elevator. The air in the catwalk felt lighter. The suffocating weight of my toxic family had finally been lifted. My work here was entirely finished. 3 months is a remarkably short amount of time to completely dismantle and rebuild a reality, but in the world of crisis management, 90 days is an eternity. The morning after the gala, the city of Atlanta woke up to a political earthquake. The front page of every local newspaper and the top story on every morning broadcast featured the exact same image. It was a high-definition photograph of DeAndre being escorted out of the Grand Plaza Hotel in federal handcuffs, the glowing offshore bank account numbers, perfectly framing his terrified face in the background. The gossip blogs that had eagerly published his lies just days prior completely turned on him, scrambling to cover the massive federal fraud investigation. DeAndre did not get to go home that night. Because he was deemed a flight risk with access to offshore capital, a federal judge denied his initial request for bail. He has spent the last 90 days sitting in a heavily guarded holding facility, awaiting his official sentencing. His high-priced campaign defense attorneys formally withdrew from his case the moment they realized his campaign accounts had been seized by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He is currently being represented by a highly overworked public defender. Given the sheer volume of digital evidence Malik and Harrison provided to the authorities, the prosecutors are not offering a plea deal. DeAndre is facing a minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary. Jasmine proved exactly how deep her loyalty truly ran. The Monday morning following the disastrous gala, she filed for divorce. She hired one of the most ruthless family law attorneys in the state of Georgia and immediately filed an emergency motion to separate her personal assets from his federal seizures. She played the role of the oblivious, traumatized victim to absolute perfection. Through a series of aggressive legal maneuvers, she managed to drain whatever clean, legitimate money DeAndre had left in his personal checking accounts, leaving him absolutely destitute. She took the designer furniture, her jewelry, and the remaining dignity he had, completely abandoning him to face the federal government entirely alone. But the most satisfying resolution took place in the Fulton County Probate Court. The morning DeAndre was federally indicted, Judge Abernathy mysteriously decided to recuse himself from our family estate case, likely terrified that the federal investigators would start looking into his own golf course alliances. A new strictly by-the-book judge was assigned to the docket. Without DeAndre to fund the legal fees, and with the elder abuse allegations completely evaporating under the light of DeAndre's own criminal behavior, Brenda had absolutely no leverage left to fight the execution of my father's trust. The court lifted the freeze on my personal and corporate bank accounts immediately. But the final blow to Brenda came when my father's true, untampered will was officially unsealed and executed. For 20 years, Brenda had paraded around the massive stone estate in Buckhead, acting as the undisputed queen of the castle. She assumed that upon my father's death, the primary residence would automatically default to her, allowing her to continue hosting her superficial country club luncheons. She was wrong. My father was a quiet man, but he was incredibly observant. He knew Brenda and DeAndre viewed his wealth as an endless ATM. He knew they would eventually squander his legacy to fund their own vanity. The will explicitly stated that while Brenda would receive a modest, heavily regulated monthly stipend to cover her basic living expenses, the primary estate, the sprawling grounds, and the entire property deed were left entirely and unconditionally to me. Brenda was given 30 days by the court to vacate my property. I did not hire a lawyer to deliver the eviction notice. I drove to the estate and handed it to her myself. She was standing in the grand foyer, surrounded by packing boxes, looking older and more fragile than I had ever seen her. The arrogant, condescending woman who had tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward just months ago was completely gone. She took the paper from my hand with trembling fingers. She tried to offer a tearful apology, muttering about how things had gotten out of hand, but I simply turned around and walked out the front door without speaking a single word to her. Silence is the one thing a narcissist can never manipulate. As for my professional life, the attempted smear campaign ended up being the greatest marketing strategy my public relations firm could have ever asked for. The Monday after the gala, the chief executive officer of the regional bank, who had dropped my retainer, called my private office line. He spent 10 minutes apologizing profusely for doubting my integrity, begging to reinstate their contract. The healthcare network followed suit a few hours later. I agreed to take them both back, but I doubled their monthly retainer fees. They signed the new contracts without a single moment of hesitation. The corporate world of Atlanta had watched me navigate a highly public, deeply personal, and incredibly vicious attack without ever breaking a sweat. They watched me systematically dismantle a corrupt politician in real time. My firm was flooded with calls from high-net-worth individuals, massive tech conglomerates, and elite public figures wanting to retain my services. We are currently projecting record-breaking profits for the fiscal year. I am standing on the sprawling marble balcony of my father's estate right now. The property is quiet. The manicured lawns are perfectly still, and the heated swimming pool reflects the deep purple hues of the sunset. I have spent the last few weeks redesigning the interior, pulling down the heavy, pretentious velvet curtains Brenda loved so much, and letting the natural light flood into the house. My physical wounds have completely healed. The surgical incisions across my abdomen have faded into thin, pale scars. Sometimes I run my fingers over them, a quiet reminder of the day I hit the hospital floor and decided I was never going to let anyone push me down again. I am 35 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am living in a home that is entirely mine. I am surrounded by a family of my own choosing. People like Malik who stand by me in the darkest hours, and a dedicated team of employees who trust my leadership implicitly. I do not need my stepbrother's approval. I do not need my stepmother's validation. I only needed to trust my own immense capability. When toxic people tell you the story is not over yet, believe them. They will push you. They will test your boundaries, and they will try to write a narrative where you are the victim and they are the victor. They will use your history against you and demand your silence. Just make sure you are the one holding the pen. Has anyone ever underestimated your ability to rewrite the ending of your own life? Have you ever had to stand up to people who thought they held all the power only to show them exactly what you are made of? Let me know in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about holding your ground, setting unbreakable boundaries, and taking back your power. Thank you for watching. And remember, your strength is built in the moments they think you are broken.